Hello, welcome. Thanks for your patience. I'd like to call to order the March 12, 2013 regular meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education. Sandy, will you call the roll?
Albright.
Here.
Belville. Here. Benford. Here. Fuqua.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Reed.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to remind all who have gathered here tonight that the vision of the Boulder Valley School District currently is to graduate students in the new century who have the knowledge, skills, and personal characteristics that will make this world a safer, more thoughtful, and more inclusive place in which to live. In support of that agenda, a vision, I'd like to call the superintendent's report. Dr. Messenger.
Well, good evening, President Reed and members of the board. I will keep my comments brief this evening because several of the items that are on the information agenda are topics that I might normally address. I would just, we remain active in our work with the legislature around issues that are important to the Boulder Valley School District and consistent with our platform, a legislative platform, which you approved earlier in the season. And that work continues, and as you do follow that through the news media, so you're pretty well informed. I will say since the introduction of the School Finance Act at the end of last week, we were involved in a number of meetings at the end of the week working with our peers, colleagues from other school districts, this Colorado Department of Education, a number of folks trying to, begin our analysis on that. We have a brief presentation for you later this evening regarding that. So I think that'll begin a constructive discussion around the proposed School Finance Act. The other thing is I emailed you a couple of times last week just letting you know about school visits. So Sandy's working her magic with my schedule to have me have the opportunity to visit schools. We've set up a number of visits this spring. I thought I'd just maybe comment a little bit on that format for you. Obviously not being as new as I was a year ago, my interest is a little more in-depth conversation. So in each case, I will do a walking tour of the school with the building administration, with the assigned assistant superintendent, as well as their schedules allow, an opportunity to visit with building leadership at the school and also to have faculty meeting. So last week in visiting two schools, had a chance to do some questions and answers with faculty, a little brief presentation about our work around goals, vision, and mission so that they're informed our early work on budget and a little bit on our work around school finance, but also providing adequate time for them to ask questions on topics of interest to them. And those are always constructive conversations. It gives me a chance to spend quality time with employees of our district. So I look forward to more of those visits this spring. We're doing a lot of good work. Obviously, state assessment right now has our attention. And so, and since the approval by the board 2 weeks ago with the math materials acquisition, Jackie Weber and the team have been actively preparing and designing a professional development to facilitate a good transition to that work in the fall with students. So with that, Jim, it would conclude my report, and I'd be glad to answer any questions from members of the board.
Thank you, Dr. Messenger. Look around. I don't see any comments or questions, so we'll proceed to our next item on the agenda, student communication. Students.
Here, I'm Katie Dishman.
And I'm Ethan Reed.
And we're giving an update on the Green Pledge. This past week, I drafted up an email to all the principals in the high schools in the district. And I sent that to Gita. She revised it, added in some details, and sent it to Deidre Pilch. And so she is going to send that out to all the principals. And in it, we will know what schools are participating by March 22nd in the pledge. We asked them to email us by then. We also asked for time in the assembly, just a little 30-second or, have everyone stand up, whoever takes the pledge. And also, Gita found a funder for the green ribbons. She didn't specifically say where, but we're going to meet later and talk about that. So we have money for the ribbons.
And so we kind of asking each school to have a different club take over it to find time to take the survey and just publicize that for the different kids who want to do that. And the idea was to set up kind of a Google survey thing where they could sign into it or like go talk to a counselor and just like have them like sign down like, hey, I pledge to live a green life after that. And so then using that, we can see the results of how many kids from each school like want to do it and how many schools participate and like just the number and percentage of like students or seniors who pledge to do this.
Yeah, so Gita is setting up that Google account, and then that way SAC and Gita, and we're going to try and see if the schools can also see how many students are taking the survey, and so by the end we can have a percentage of how many graduating seniors throughout BVSD took the pledge 2013. So.
Yeah. Got any questions?
All right, yeah, thank you. Board members? Lori?
I have a question. Thank you for your work. I'm really glad you guys are working on student activism. Can you give us a reminder? I mean, we talked about it before, but could you give a reminder both for us and for the public about what the Green Pledge is?
Yes, it's a pledge for that all graduating seniors will have the opportunity to take. That's just basically stating that in whatever career or higher education life that they pursue after high school, they will pledge to live a greener life.
Great. I hope it's 100%. Thanks.
Any other board members? Thank you for your presentation. I wish you luck. We've always offered anything we can do to help, so anything we can do to help, let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next item on our agenda is public hearing and public participation, but we have no one signed up tonight, so we can dispense with that and move directly to board communication. Board members? Lori?
Anybody else can go first is fine. I was really pleased and lucky to be able to participate in several of the community engagement sessions that we had at Lafayette, in the library, and at Nederland, and at Fairview last week. And I really appreciate everybody who showed up and came to tell us what they think, both about their goals, but also just a conversation about what they want from their district and some of the concerns and worries that they have expressed. And I was glad, Bruce, that you were able to answer some of those questions. I don't think we got to all of them because a lot of individuals have a lot of questions, but it was a great process. So thank you, Leslie, for setting that up years ago and making this all work. And it was just, I really appreciated the community's being willing to speak up. It was great. The other thing that I was really lucky to do, and I sat with Jenny through this yesterday or last week, was to listen to the oral arguments at the Colorado Supreme Court on the Lobato case. And the lawyers who we have been supporting for the last several years in this case did a tremendous job, I thought, of representing what the issues are in terms of the constitutionality and the issues about whether the court has the right to make a decision in this case and how they can influence the legislature. But it was really just a really interesting educational experience for me. It was the first time I'd been in the Colorado Supreme Court, and it was a real thrill. And the other thing I did was a whole lot more fun. It was to go to the Mesa Elementary School play and the Fairview High School Pops concert and the Fairview Guinevere concert. And these are girls' jazz choir from Fairview that who were selected from several hundred competitors to attend the National Choir Directors Concert or conference, annual conference in Texas later this spring. And these young women were quite amazing, and it was a wonderful show, and I hope they do really well at their annual conference. So thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Leslie?
Let's see, I got to be a judge in the science fair this year, and I judged middle school environmental science, which I've never done middle school, and that was really fun. You know, it's just great to see what the kids come up with and to talk to them, and I want to say it was great working with my colleagues, all of which I pretty much knew. We had scientists from NOAA, Jeff Anderson from NCAR, we had some graduate students, and I want to thank all the volunteers because there were a lot of projects and a lot of volunteers needed. So, but everyone I talked to really enjoyed interacting with the kids. So I think it's a very positive thing. I brought the T-shirt that they handed out. It's so cute. So it's the power of inquiry. And so the staff and the students all had this on, so I wore it too. It was nice. And yes, I just wanted to mention with the Netherland community engagement, this is the first time that I know of that we've actually gone up to the mountains to get input, and we had about a dozen very concerned community members. I think they really appreciated us coming up there, so I don't know how community engagement will roll out in the future, but I think this was a worthwhile experiment that showed when we go up there, the community will show up. It was interesting, they realized there's some issues, not so much school-based, but community-based, and they really wanted to gather together and work through those because it does impact the schools. It's a small community, so they said how important the schools are as an anchor. And one woman I thought had a really nice analogy. She said, we need to be a wheel on the outside directing all of our energy inside to the hub, which are the schools, and really get the community involved. So I felt very positive that we got together with them and heard, through their discussions what they need to do, and I think they're going to be pretty proactive. And then last, I just want to say we all were just honoring 31 teachers that got their National Board certification, which is a very arduous process. And each one got to speak about what they got out of it. And it's really obvious that it's made a big impact on their teaching. And we just keep growing more and more excellent teachers in our district. And as we all know, we're now #1, even though we're not the largest district in the state, that we've got the most number of teachers that are board certified. So I want to congratulate all of those teachers and Virginia Schick for being the lead mentor. It's really exciting to see that.
Thank you, Leslie. Sam?
Well, echo those congratulations to the board certified teachers. And then the highlight of my week last week was the Impact Awards, where we honored more of our great teachers, as well as the head of our teen pregnancy program and one of our school bus drivers. And, I would defy anybody to attend that event and not feel inspired about the staff of our school district. It's just great. And I met this young man. I didn't judge the science fair, but there was a young man presenting in the lobby of the Boulder Theater. Michael Chen, I think was his name, and he had this project on separating compounds of natural gas, I think, with crystals. The kid is going to be famous someday for doing that. It was very impressive. Also, I had a great visit to Broomfield Heights Middle School with Dr. Pilch and visited with Principal Chris Meyer, learned about some of the great work they're doing there, both on the academic side and the school climate side. So I would echo Dr. Messenger's comments about getting out and visiting schools. And finally, one plug for the community engagement since the public forums are done. Please encourage everybody you know to use the BVSD Listens tool so that we can continue to gather input now that our public forums are concluded. And thanks to Briggs and everybody for setting those up, because I really learned a lot from listening to the public there.
Thanks, Sam. Tom?
Sure. I'll just echo a couple of things. First of all, with the National Board Certified Teachers, I just want to say publicly that I admire those teachers, not only for their hard work, some 400 hours to get this certification, but for their dedication to doing it in the first place, and that really impacts our students. Congratulations to all of you guys. Secondly, as with Sam and a number of others in this room, I was at the Impact Awards ceremony. And I sat there and I listened to those teachers who were being honored for awards there talk about what they did. Not only teachers, but staff members as well. I have to say I was really humbled by that, because those are the people that are really impacting our students, we make big decisions about budgets and policies and goals, and those are all important. But those are the ones that are really making an impact. It's more than just them, obviously. It's all of our teachers out there. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Jenny?
Well, I was an Impact on Education certification too, and I agree with what both of you said. It's really a fun and inspiring event. Same with the National Board certification. The teachers have received their National Board certification. One of the things that I thought about as I was listening to the teachers talk about how that process had affected their teaching was the way that it causes them to reflect on their practice and to teach their students to reflect too. And that's really great because we want our kids to be reflective. But also, it makes me think that this all, I mean, I'm hoping that maybe someday all of our teachers may never be National Board certified, but as Shelley and I work with the staff to develop a new teacher evaluation in compliance with 191, one of the things we've talked about a lot is this whole process of self-reflection on teachers' teaching practices, and it kind of makes me excited that maybe our whole district will be moving in that direction with our board certified teachers at the forefront. So, let's see. And again, I enjoyed the Lobato oral arguments too. I'll add what Lori didn't say, which was really exciting, was they've never had that big a crowd at the Supreme Court ever. They had, the whole Supreme Court room was full, and there were students from Center Colorado taking up a whole row. It was really wonderful. And then they had a courtroom downstairs that they were streaming to that was also full, and then there was a third courtroom that was full, and I understand that people were milling around in the outside the courtrooms because even after they'd filled up 3 courtrooms, they still didn't have room for everybody who wanted to hear those arguments. So I was inspired to hear that level of dedication or the importance of public education in Colorado and to see that many people who had turned out. And again, I learned a lot from community engagement too. I'd like to thank Leslie and Sam and our staff for putting that together. I thought the process was really good, and I was a little disappointed that not very many people turned out from Broomfield. So if there are people from Broomfield out there listening who didn't turn out to any of the community engagements, or anybody anywhere else, I hope they will, because that's my community, then I hope that they will go online and give their thoughts. But I thought the quality of the people who did turn out everywhere, the quality of their comments, or at least the 2 engagement sessions I was at, was very high. And then I'd like to say I got to visit Heatherwood Elementary with Vaughn. Was it last week or the week before? I can't remember now. But what a great school. I hadn't been there before, and I just loved it. I thought, so hi out there to Heatherwood. There was just all kinds of wonderful stuff going on, and I had a little girl explain to me, she could have been the teacher of this classroom. Her class was reading Roald Dahl, and she explained to me that was a really good fit for her classroom because there were kids at all different reading levels in her classroom, and Roald Dahl had written books at all different reading levels, so there was a book for everybody, and they could all enjoy and understand and talk to each other about it. And I thought, you, 8-year-old, are ready to teach this class. You're just brilliant. So, but the teacher was very good too, so I could say that she was a product of good instruction. So anyway, hello Heatherwood, that was really fun. I hope I get to go to some more schools before the end of the year. And then I'd just like to comment to the board, and it may be relevant as we go on tonight, that I know Lori works with CASB on their executive board, but I'm on the Legislative Resolutions Committee, and they will be meeting on Friday, and we'll be talking about the new school finance bill. So if anybody has any thoughts about, I'll be listening for our thoughts about that to sort of share with that group, but if anybody has anything they'd like particularly to pass on about that or any other legislation before the legislature that's school-related, let me know. And I think that's all I've got. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jenny. I think what I had wanted to say was well covered by everyone. And to build on what you were saying, Jenny, I know this board and previous boards has invested in the Lobato lawsuit. It is nice to see it wind its way through and get to a point where it will be adjudicated. I know the legislature has been working on some options that they might be able to propose depending on what the court decides, and I'm glad that's on the agenda later tonight too. So thanks everyone for bringing it up. And with that, I think we'll conclude the board communication and move to our first information item tonight, which is a literacy update. Dr. Messenger?
Well, thank you, President Reed. This is a presentation we've been looking forward to providing to you, and I know you've been anticipating it coming to you. I'm going to give just a brief introduction, then I'm going to ask Angel and Jonathan to make their way up. Included in your materials and posted on our website is the presentation, which we'll go through so you can find it in your agenda. And also, we provided some background information about the literacy work that we're doing in the district. The our focus tonight isn't on the intervention strategies. That presentation we provided to you last spring, but we wanted to give you that context because the data that you're going to see this evening will relate to that. You were involved in in-depth conversation last spring with among yourselves, our staff, and the community about our budget priorities, and we did some pretty assertive work around focusing our resources around interventions. And so what we wanted to do tonight is to come back, and I think the same presentation is going to go before DAC in the not too distant future, because they too are very interested, the District Accountability Committee, very interested in this discussion. So what the question we wanted to answer for you is, given the investment we did make, even during very tight budget times last spring, is there evidence that that work is making a difference? And so that's what we'd like to present to you. It isn't our intent this evening to engage you in a budget discussion around that. We'll have that opportunity down the road a piece. But I think this will give you some context, some background when we engage in setting priorities going forward. Clearly, literacy has been, continues to be one of our single highest priorities. And so, again, I'm pleased that Angel and Jonathan are here this evening to share with you the data that we have. Obviously, we have not taken, well, we are taking the state assessment right now. We won't have those results later, but we've been collecting good data in addition to that, which we'll share with you this evening, and of course entertain your questions. So, Angel, I don't know if you're up or who's taking lead. So.
It was print, we took it off. Oh, here we go. It was queued, looks like it was closed, so we'll get it up again. Sorry, Jonathan? So thank you for this opportunity to talk this evening about the literacy work we've been doing. We've titled this presentation, Every Day, Every Child. Every day, every child reads something they choose, reads something accurately, reads something they understand, writes about something that is meaningful to them, talks to peers about their reading and writing, listens to a fluent adult read. This quote came from Richard Allington. He's a national reading researcher and one highly respected in Boulder Valley. We used his research and other current research to clarify our department goals this year and to structure a comprehensive literacy framework. Our 2 department goals, short yet profound. All students will be motivated, fluent, strategic, constructive readers, writers, and communicators, and that every student needing extra support to read and write at grade level and above have the means to receive that instruction or intervention that aligns with universal classroom instruction. We also strengthened structured our comprehensive literacy framework, which includes ongoing assessment, so flexible grouping can occur and teachers can design focused plans for explicit, intentional instruction. That effective instruction is evidenced in student engagement and learning. Every day, teachers are expected to read and write to students. They demonstrate what proficiency in reading and writing look like, then monitor students' efforts to take on those behaviors of proficient readers and writers. Every day, teachers are expected to read and write with students. They meet in small group and provide instruction that is tied to the curriculum essentials and also based from the ongoing assessment. There's intentional instruction so that new learning occurs for every student from every instructional episode. Every day, students read and write by themselves. This provides opportunity to incorporate what they're learning from the work with their teacher into their daily reading and writing. This year, we've been able to focus on universal classroom instruction. We've had 4 professional development models. We've added 2 lab schools to our comprehensive literacy schools. And we've had a fierce focus with all of these on early literacy development. What do we see? Here is a new learner of English that came to us in August. You see her writing in August, in October, and in February. That's I have a dog, I have a little dog. This child, because of the learnings, the skills of our teachers, this child has taken on over 32 evidence outcomes or essential learnings, specifically related to phonics and phonological awareness. This child first started developing the oral language structures in English. So the teacher focused on listening and speaking, then incorporated that knowledge into writing and reading. This child now knows that print carries the message. This child understands concepts of print, left to right, returns top to bottom, return sweep. This child understands syllables, rhymes, segmenting and blending of sounds. This child here, the same student, is also showing now concepts of spacing, concept of word, concept of letter, concepts of sentence. This child is also using high-frequency words, able to decode when reading, and recognizes and uses upper and lowercase letters. Tremendous growth in a few months. Another student's writing in August is I fell. Obvious, you can see I fell. Then in October, she was writing about a sleepover that she had with a friend. In February, this kindergarten student is expected to use the entire writing process. You can see the detailed plan and evidence of revision. This child is also expected to publish this piece of text. This child is applying phonics knowledge proficiently when reading. This child reads fluently with expression and appropriate phrasing. This child understands onset and rhyme to create new words, uses context to figure out unfamiliar words, and again is using that writing process every day. Providing the professional development for our teachers at that Tier 1 universal instruction, developing model classrooms, providing lesson studies, teacher labs, our reflective, skillful teachers have become more intentional, and students are accelerating their learning in both reading and writing. We've also focused on Tier 2 and Tier 3. We're going to share information regarding 2 major targeted and intensive interventions, leveled literacy intervention and reading recovery. Currently, we have 92 LLI, leveled literacy intervention teachers trained, instructing students in 32 of our elementary schools. You can see the breakdown of the role of those teachers. We also have 4 teachers that are working in our 2 dual language and 1 biliteracy school that are providing intervention instruction in Spanish.
So one way of looking at the intervention is to look at who is being served. So as you look at the demographics of the 604 students who have received this intervention to date, you can see that they're represented more in English language learners in terms of students on IEPs and students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch than the counterparts are overall, about twice or so as often. What you can also see is looking at the gains that they've made over time, and what you can tell in looking at the data that we have here is that the kind of gains that are made over the period of the intervention are about comparable to what we find nationally, and that and that the kind of gains that they make are they tend to make a greater number of months gains in the levels at which they can read, when those are measured in terms of month, than they do the number of months that they're basically spending overall. The pattern that isn't, the dot that isn't quite like the others is kindergarten, and that does follow the pattern, what we see nationally.
And we also start kindergarten later.
And we begin that later, so it's not that kindergarten work begins in August in this intervention. Thank you, Angela.
Oh. Reading recovery is the other major intervention that we have implemented this year. And we have 9 trained teachers and 3 teacher leaders providing direct instruction in 10 elementary schools. 4 teachers also are using Descubriendo la Lectora, the Spanish reading recovery.
So, well, what we can see again, looking here, and noting that these are students who are in first grade only, whereas the other data we were showing you were a mix of first and second plus some third and other grades. What we can see is that again, the ones who are being served here are more likely than their counterparts to have to be English language learners, students on IEPs, or recipients of free and reduced lunch. The data that you're seeing for the current year are just students who have been served to date, so the numbers aren't as high as in past years, due in part we're just that far along in the year, and in part because the number of schools that we're serving at this point. Now, what we see in looking at students who have been actually exited from the regional recovery is that they've made the kind of gains over time that we've seen in the national data. Now, there are others who aren't on this chart, right, who are students who aren't exited by saying that we've completed the intervention and they've moved on out of it with having benefited by now reading at or near the level that we want them at. There are other students who we've finished this for, who we are actually using to say that they now need special education based on this intervention not having worked. So just noting the caution that some of these numbers are a little small, but the data that we're seeing follow the kind of pattern that we see nationally overall, more or less, with the kind of gains being made.
Something that's vital to us in Boulder Valley is that no intervention can stand alone, and collaboration, cooperation, and cohesive instruction across the tiers is vital for our learners, especially our learners that are the most fragile, that are receiving these interventions. So we are working diligently to make connections between our interventionists and classroom teachers. We had a high number of teachers that wanted to come and share that information with you, and what we asked was that we would have, thank you.
Do we need to plug this in?
Yes. What we thought we would share is the words of one teacher. Oops. A classroom teacher. It says currently unavailable. And you can read what she has said next to the picture. And it is about a first grade teacher seeing the value of reading recovery and the work that they do together. This particular teacher had 4 students. 3 of the students, three of the 4 had individual education plans. They were students with special needs. And those students that have received reading recovery in this classroom have been able to are able to keep pace with the work that's occurring in the regular classroom. The students see themselves as readers and writers, able to complete grade level work. And that would have seemed impossible and overwhelming before this intervention. At the secondary level, this year we have been able to provide professional development to all language arts teachers. It's been very specific and structured around the use of the Curriculum Essentials document, planning lessons using a backwards plan, understanding by design, and also assisting the teachers to understand the shift that's coming with the new assessment called PARC. All of the language arts teachers will be designing unit blueprints that they will be able to share, that they'll be sharing across schools and across grade levels. We've also been able to provide direct support to students through secondary literacy interventionists.
And it really here what we can see is we can look at who is being served by these teachers, and again we see the pattern about the needs being met with this for a group of students who is more likely to be English language learners, students on IEPs, or receiving free and reduced lunch than the population is overall. We don't have intervention data. We don't have data in that we don't gather the same level of data on kids individually just by the nature of these. This many students being served by 9 or so FTE. So it's not the same individual work being done with lots of data being gathered on a kid as he or she progresses over time.
I'm sorry to interrupt this. I'm enjoying your presentation, but I can't understand your graphs, and I'm sure it's just me. But could you just take a minute and run through exactly what it is we're looking for?
Thank you very much for asking. So what we look at on the left-hand side is that of the 960 students being served, a little over half of them are male. What we see is that they're concentrated in grade 9, with about a third being in ninth grade in the box that's purple, and a fairly even mix of 10th, 8th, 7th, and 6th graders other than that, with just a few 11th and 12th graders. We see that they're about half Hispanic and a little under half white, and that almost half are English language learners, either as designated as non-English proficient, limited English proficient, or full English proficient.
Top of that,
Means
NA on
people
top of that just
who
means
aren't,
thank you.
aren't, right, who
Okay.
are, yeah, exactly, native English. And in the same way, 28% are, have an IEP, the other 72% don't, and 59% of these students are eligible for free and reduced lunch.
Our goals are continuously in our sights, and we believe that we've made great strides toward reaching these goals. Again, thank you for this opportunity. Questions and comments?
Thank you for the presentation. Dr. Messenger?
So, thank you, Angel and Jonathan, and many others who have contributed to this. I made the statement last week when I visited school that I would say this, so I'm going to say it, that this data is where we want it to be, and that's good news. What we recognize when we did this work in the spring last year is that we are not at full capacity, and so we're not having the overall impact that we want. So the good news is the investment we're making is having positive outcomes, but people are working really hard to make this happen. So as we go forward, as we promised last spring, we'll work to find ways to increase the scope of this work. So I just wanted to give that additional context, because sometimes that's hard to see in all these numbers because we directed down into the data we're collecting, but that doesn't mean that every student is receiving the level of service that they might need or deserve because of other limitations, not because of the hard work that these folks aren't doing. It's our budgetary limitations that we knew going into this year. So I just wanted to add that additional context, and then Jim, if there are questions, I know that we'd be glad to answer them.
All right, thanks, Dr. Messenger. Leslie?
I noticed consistently that there was about a 10% gap between boys and girls, with more boys. Is that typical across the country or particular to our district?
Let me look at that while Angel answers your next question.
And you don't have to answer it right now if you don't know for certain. And I was just curious with the teacher writing to the students each day, and I noticed in the one little girl's picture where there was a little sticky note with some questions. Is that one way of, like, maybe think about this to incorporate into your writing to make it more rich? And is that sort of the idea of the teacher writing to the students?
The teacher writing to the student is the teacher demonstrating his or her writing, how we write as adult writers. So demonstrating the revision process, demonstrating planning, drafting, and how it is challenging to create. And then also sharing how the teacher publishes or shares his or her writing. What you saw there with that sticky note was the result of the teacher in a small group instruction focusing on the skill of revision, developing within the child the ability to question her writing and say, am I getting my message clear for my audience, who in that case was her mother. So it's that's the process of revision.
Well, and, just hearing about this, I mean, this is how I work with graduate students writing scientific papers. So, I'm sure when teachers are doing science notebooks, it's the same process.
Yes.
It could apply to any discipline. And it's an important skill to learn, no matter what the discipline.
So students aren't just learning individualized skill or individual skills and memorizing facts. They're incorporating it into creating the behaviors of real readers and real writers.
And to answer what you asked, the national data on the LLI would indeed match about what we have. Some variation there. I don't have reading recovery data right at hand. I would say that for any group of students who are greater in proportion on an IEP, they are going to be on average greater in proportion male, in that boys are more likely to be on IEPs than girls.
Board Member Sam.
Well, I appreciate your hard work and dedication to this and the hard work of our teachers. So am I understanding correctly that if the growth we've seen is consistent with the past several years, that we're not doing worse, but we're also not doing better? I'm talking about the level literacy slide in particular, showing consistent growth, but not more rapid growth. That's not changing.
Well, if, while I don't want to place a whole lot in the difference between 4 and 5 months, getting 8 months of growth in 4 months as opposed to 5, I would say that it's moving the right way. I do want to add, in any effort, the quality of data that one gathers over time tends to improve. So I don't want to oversell that, but it's at least moving the right way and getting results that are near what the national data have. I mean that for me is in ways the bigger benchmark. Are we getting the kind of results that other people get when they're doing this? And my answer to that is the data would appear to be comparable. Yes.
And what I find exciting about this is that this past year, due to the funding we had, we were able to, and the structure we chose, we were able to offer LLI training to many teachers. So what you're seeing here is from past years, we had a smaller number of teachers, and last year was our second year of implementation of reading recovery with a small group of teachers, and we had the results that matched the national norm. This year, we've added another large group of teachers so that we have at least a half-time LLI teacher in every building. And even though it's their first year in training, we're seeing results that match the national norm. So we'll see as we continue how our scores strengthen.
And the biggest challenge you've had in doing this is insufficient funding? Did I hear Dr. Messenger say that?
So I think I appreciate your questioning, Sam. I think there's two ways. One of the things we talked about last spring was making a significant investment and not seeing the kinds of overall results that we'd like to see. And so we refreshed those and we regrouped and we focused those investments we were making. So one is we wanted to be sure that we could demonstrate that the resources we were investing but are making a difference, and I think that's what this data shows. Now, the question will be over time, can we continue to invest more resources so that we can increase additional opportunities? Now, you might recall last spring when we talked about this, some of getting there is about training up, getting staff to the point. So some of it's about number of FTE we can allocate to schools, but also it's being sure that when we invest in those positions, that they have the proper training so that that resource invested has the kind of return that we're seeing here. So yes, one of the limitations we're facing is being able to continue to grow capacity by having FTE, full-time equivalent positions, to do this good work and do more of it over time. So,
I recall we were told last spring that we could do better with less money.
with the amount we are investing, yes. So, but we also said this is a quarter of the implementation last spring. I think, Angel, if I have that correct.
That is correct. The LLI implementation is a quarter of the way toward full implementation of the actual amount of intervention that we need so that all students are receiving the intervention support. Again, what you're also seeing is that there are many more students that were able to receive this intervention that we didn't have available to them last year. So we have assisted a higher number of students to reach grade level or accelerate to this degree this year with the funding that we did have.
And we're going to continue this discussion when we see the TCAP scores?
Absolutely. We'll update our, all data with that information, and we'll also probably revisit some of your questions, Sam, when we work on budget over the next month as well.
Thanks. Tom?
It's great to see that these programs are having an impact, and it's good to see data. Now, is this data representative? Is it average? Is it sampled? You know, we just saw data points on charts.
Sure. This is all the data that we have, so this is for all students for whom we have it.
All students, great.
Yep, and knowing that, you know, we constantly work over time to get better at gathering data, and that this year, many person weeks have been spent trying to gather our data the best way that we can so that we can provide to you data at this time that we feel good enough to show.
Clean.
So what's the standard deviation on this data, would you say? You know, for example, with the level literacy of the number of months per growth per calendar month kind of thing?
Sure. So on those, the reading gain, the variation on that ranges from a low at elementary of 1.8 to a high at the fourth grade level of 5.5.
Okay.
More typical numbers about 3 or 4, with elementary being lower because elementary there aren't as many months in the year.
Right.
And not as many.
So we're making really progress across the board. Some is higher than others, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Another question here. For reading recovery, you show that in 2012-13, we have actually less trained teachers in 11-12. Can you explain that?
Yes, what we did was to ensure that we were able to put LLI a 0.5 FTE in each of the buildings and also be able to have some reading recovery available. Again, it's a quarter of the way rather than full implementation. We had to decrease the number of reading recovery teachers. We also then focused in specific elementary schools. Again, as we look at moving toward full implementation, we'd like to see that we are able to have more trained reading recovery teachers within more buildings.
Okay, so you had to focus some of the reading recovery on leveled literacy, huh? Okay.
For this first year, to have that support through all the buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Shelley?
It looks like you're off to a great start, and I just wanted to share a personal anecdote. I have a friend whose daughter's in reading recovery, and she is so thrilled with her daughter's progress over the last year. She's just amazed, and every time she sees me, she thanks me and the board for undertaking reading recovery. So I guess my only question is that I know that what you presented today is around mainly interventions for kids who aren't reading very well. Do you feel like the district's literacy goals and processes also encompass those kids who are reading well and who are above grade level? And I'm wondering how we're addressing their needs as well.
And that brings us back to this year, we were able to really focus on what our goals were. And we did develop that framework, literacy framework. And we were able to define what types of professional development for the classroom teacher were going to be most impactful. We've narrowed it to these labs, advisory model classrooms, and grade level and school-based lesson studies. And what we are doing is working with our strong classroom teachers and helping them to become more intentional by looking at data, no matter where that student is within their learning, and taking them to their next level. So it's, I would say, yes, we have started. This is our foundation year at really putting a tight lens on Tier 1 classroom instruction to meet the needs of all learners at all levels. We're beginning.
Okay, thanks, Jenny.
So, I actually want to ask Sam a question, because I didn't quite understand what you were asking, Sam. I think you saw, so were you saying that the data looks to you like we're not making any growth, or we're not getting any better at what we're doing? And I just didn't understand that question.
Yeah, well, I was specifically looking at the slide that showed growth consistent across years and nationally, which seemed to me to indicate that we were consistent with past years, during which we had a different approach to literacy, but we weren't improving that growth rate.
Okay. So is that what that slide means?
No.
Well, you can look at the pattern about the number of months gained, right, in the number of months kids are receiving lessons on average. And you can see some change over time there. But as I was saying, I don't want to oversell the difference between 8 months and 8 months of reading level growth in 5 months of instruction on average versus 8 and 4.
So this level, so what I hear Sam saying is that this may mean that level literacy isn't any better than what we were doing before, and that's what this means?
Because we restructured where the resources went, we were able to provide level literacy intervention in all of our buildings, which means this is showing that we are working with more students and more teachers have this high degree of training. So we've been able to have more students accelerate making 8 months growth in 4 months or getting to grade level. So this graph is showing that in 2009-10, we had a small number of teachers trained and a small number of kids receiving the intervention and making those gains. Now we have more teachers trained and many more students receiving the intervention, and we are making gains with many more students.
Okay.
So if I could add to
Is
this.
that,
So we had many students in the system who were not receiving LLI before and weren't showing this growth. The students who were receiving LLI, a smaller number than this year, so we're keeping pace with the growth of the students who have received this service in the past. We just had hundreds of students receiving literacy services in the past that was not focused LLI, and they were not showing this kind of growth.
correct.
So I think we're looking at a same set that has grown this year. But if you go back to 9-10, there were a lot more services being provided, but what we weren't seeing was a return on the investment. That's why we did what we did last year that said, let's focus where we're investing these dollars on services. That was a hardship for schools because they lost the staff that they had been accustomed to, but we weren't seeing the results of having that staff. So we're focusing on programs. So the question that we wanted you to ask and we're trying to answer is, was that the right thing to do? If we had charts to show that the investment in LLI wasn't showing a return, then that might not be the right investment of those resources, and we need to find a different way to invest them. Now it appears we are seeing a return on that investment. Now we just need to find ways to expand that investment so we can incorporate. Every child that would benefit from LLI is not receiving those services. Every child that would benefit from reading recovery today is not receiving those services because of a limit of resources. Is that fair, Angel?
Correct, yes.
So that's being partial implementation, but no sense to fully implement if it's not having an impact. So we want to verify it's having the impact, and I think that's what this data set show. Now the question for our challenge is, going forward, is how do we expand that opportunity for more and more kids and still keep an eye on this to make sure that we're having that same impact, and then also look at the summative measures for literacy in our district, which are this. I mean, I don't want to put too much stock in the state assessment. It too has its limitations, but it is a record keeper for us. And with the READ Act and new state assessments, we'll have new record keepers for us. But I guess that's the part that may be lost in some of this, is that we've expanded the number of children receiving LLI. Those who are receiving it are benefiting at least at what we're seeing at the national average. If all students who had the need were receiving it, we'd see even greater numbers of students who have that benefit.
Yes, correct.
So how many students were receiving LLI 2011-12? Do we know that?
Not off the top of my head, but I can get that information for you. I can get you those numbers across.
Okay, because that would tell us, give us some
Yes.
information about the improvement we're seeing.
Yeah.
Just more students getting the good results.
Yep, we can get that information for you.
So, I'll follow your example, Shelley, and pass on an anecdote too. So one of the, because this really did leave a question for me. So when we were at the community engagement in Nederland, one of the moms mentioned, and I hope I get what she said right, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that her child for some reason had not received the literacy intervention she needed as an elementary school student. So now she was in middle school needing intervention, but that the mother was being realistic and realized she would never catch up and would never, and it sounded like it was a bright child. It wasn't a child, I mean, it was a child who should be able to learn, but just realistically, in her conversations with the schools and things, she just knew this child would never be able to catch up, that it was just too late by 6th grade. So I would like, what I'm hoping for is some reassurance that surely that's not true, that it's not, that this child has not fallen off the literacy train. And, I mean, so is it too late for kids who are in middle school?
So is the question more around, and maybe this is to build on what you said, which is, we didn't necessarily have these investments in the secondary level before around literacy, and now we actually have them, and so I believe what Jenny's asking is similar to what I've heard other board members ask, which is, now that we're making them, how do we know we're making enough? And I know that's not maybe the scope of tonight's discussion, but I believe that's what you're trying to get at. Is that close, Jenny?
So I think, Jenny, what we could say is that it's harder to close that gap for a 6th grader than it is for a 1st grader.
Okay, yes.
The other part of the question I hear you asking, is it impossible? No, we don't believe it's impossible. I would say we aren't as confident or sophisticated with our secondary interventions as we are in those you just saw tonight. That doesn't mean that we're not making a positive difference. It doesn't mean it's not a good investment. But one, it's harder, and two, the strategies to be used and the methodology is something we're still working on. So Angel, do you want to add to that? I mean, I think that's answering Jenny's question in part, at least.
I would agree. It is never too late to work with a student to accelerate their learning. So, and we do need to continuously take a look at what we are doing at every level, secondary included. What are the strengths of what we're doing? What are the next steps that we need to take to improve?
So am I sort of hearing, though, that the research-based programs aren't, I mean, we just don't have the research to support the middle-level learning that we do for younger kids, perhaps?
What we've chosen to do last spring was to focus on early prevention, early intervention. So the majority of our financial resources went to primary, went to elementary level.
But if we had the resource, but I'm sort of curious, I don't mean to beat this to death, I'm sorry, but if we had the resources, would we know what to do as well, or is that also part of the issue, that we just don't know what to do as well with those?
As Dr. Messenger shared, it is more difficult, more challenging when a student has felt unsuccessful for a high number of years to shift and get that student to grade level. So there are resources, there are programs, there is instruction that we can be doing at secondary level as well. And I would imagine that student is on a literacy plan or on an individualized education plan. So again, with individual students, it's hard to know what the next steps are, but we are looking at having, again, continuing to focus in on our early prevention, early intervention, and expanding and improving what we're doing at the secondary level.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, I think we had some good questions asked. I believe what I heard was more kids, fewer teachers, same benefits nationally. So I like where that's going. I do know last year when we were looking at this and redoing parts of this program, we tended to see a different set of data. So perhaps that was what the board was also commenting on. We used to see, I guess, TCAP or CSAP, and I know it's not available. And I know the board did ask, please give us information as you have it, because this was a pretty big deal for our community and for us. So I do appreciate that, but let's, when the other information and data is available,
We'd love to come back.
we'll have you right back if that's all right.
That'd be great.
So thank you for the
Thank you.
presentation tonight.
Thank you.
So our next item is another information item, a transportation study report. Dr. Messenger?
Great. I'm going to ask Bob Young to make his way to the podium. So this is sort of like repeat of what we worked on last spring, but this is another topic not unlike the last one, obviously not with the focus on instruction. Bob Young is our Director for Transportation, and he's going to introduce our guests. Last spring, we had conversation in our budget development process where, only because I was advised by Bob that we thought we could find some efficiencies in our transportation system and that we could use for instructional purposes if we could free up those investments. And so what we committed to do, because I couldn't do that immediately, is to invest in and partake in an analysis of our transportation services, with the hope that, and Bob's eye on the process on our system, thinking we could potentially have some efficiencies. So we put out a request for a proposal, contracted with some highly skilled consultants who will present to you in a minute. And so we're going to share that information with you. And I just want to applaud Bob and Don Orr's leadership and others that followed up on our conversation from last spring and have gone to work. I think it's also a model for us as a district, beyond just transportation services, of this depth of analysis and getting an outside set of eyes to look at our work, and folks who work nationally and have had success in this area to advise us in our budget planning. Hard to do it all at one time, but I think what you'll see tonight is an example that will be helpful to us. So Bob, if you would, please.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the board, Dr. Messenger. I just want to say that it has been a pleasure working with Transpar, the consulting firm who took this on, and I think we found some very interesting things, and I'm going to let them tell you all about it. We have two representatives. Kyle Martin will be doing the presentation to you, and his colleague Ruth Newby. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Thanks, Bob.
President Reed, members of the board, Dr. Messenger, thank you very much for the opportunity to serve the district. We appreciate it. This was a collaborative effort between two companies, Management Partnership Services and Transpar Group. Ruth and I are owners of Transpar Group. MPS led most of the behind-the-scenes evaluation, and Ruth and I did the on-site portion of the review and study. This is what we were charged with, was to assess the effectiveness of the system, the efficiency of the system, the policies as they can be compared to best practices throughout the industry, the constraints within the system, and then finally the costs as a result of those constraints. As I said, Ruth and I, along with a team of two other individuals, spent quite a lot of time here on site. Then we did a lot of off-site work as well. One of the things we achieved was implementation of a tool, Route Yield, which assessed every route for every bus in the system, and every school building in the system, which also allowed us to involve the drivers and most of the employees with the review. So we've met just about everybody, I think, between all of us. It involved also a principal satisfaction survey and, of course, the typical data collection that goes on with these sort of things. We came back in January and presented preliminary findings and results, and Bob and his team took those under advisement, and we've only argued about one issue, and we'll get into that later. And tonight represents the culmination of those efforts. I think the principal survey is a good place to start, and I'll start with the participation rate. Only about half the principals responded. That's a very positive thing. People that are satisfied tend not to fill these things out, and or not have time to fill them out. Those who are not satisfied always fill them out. 85% of the principals are satisfied or very satisfied with the level of service that they receive and the responsiveness of the transportation department, and that's something to be very proud of. So the 85%'s there. The strengths we found in the system, beyond the satisfaction of the principals, the driver recruiting effort here is somewhat exceptional. Bob and his team went out and found a professional recruiter to recruit folks to become drivers for the school district. It's the number one problem of all districts is the acquiring and the retaining of school bus drivers that can consistently meet the demands of the system. And where we go often, this is the biggest challenge that the school district has. That's not true here. It's very professionally done, and we applaud it, and we are actually sharing that with other clients, the approach that you have here on recruiting bus drivers. We found the safety and training to be effective in that. The data shows that the accident rate is declining. The national accident rate, if you will, is one preventable accident per 100,000 miles. The data is not as clean as it should be because not all accidents are judged the same throughout the country. However, you're trending to that number. You're barely above it now. And for an urban/suburban district of this size and this complexity, it's a very good record and tracking very well. We found the departmental leadership well-qualified, well-versed. Procedures are exceptionally well documented and updated. The organizational structure is consistent with what we find, and the staffing levels is exactly where our models are when we take into account some maintenance differences. Your maintenance department is not only charged with the maintenance of the school buses, but every other mechanical object in the district. So you are staffed higher than our models would show, and we can account for that, and therefore we judged it to be consistent with best practices. So the strengths continue. I mentioned the responsiveness. In the routing area, you utilize a software program, Edulog. It's probably the most robust and oldest software program out there. That does not make it necessarily user-friendly. And Dave and his team have done an excellent job of getting all you can out of that system, which it is, like I said, very robust. The fleet appearance we judged is good. We inspected about 10% of the fleet and observed many more buses than that. And then good system use of automation within the maintenance department. So again, we found those to be good. So what are the opportunities? What do we find that we can improve on, or what can everyone collaborate to make better? We found that the cost per student is high, and we'll get into, so that was something for us to investigate. The seat utilization of the buses was low compared to peers, and the runs per bus, and I need to explain what that is. Runs per bus is an excellent way of determining how efficiently you're using that asset. The goal for most districts is to serve three schools with one bus in the morning and 3 schools with 1 bus in the afternoon. The average we see in the high end of what we see is about 2.7 schools per bus served in well-run school districts. Unfortunately, Boulder is at 1.7, full 1 school less than that. So that is a problem and drives your cost per student up. Route planning is based on eligible riders. This is pretty common, and we have recommended and are pushing for planning more for actual ridership and less on eligible riders. There are 50 some odd different bell times within the district. And we'll elaborate on that some more, but that is quite a challenge. Typically, in the districts we work in, there are 3 to 4 bell times. 50 is a little bit different. So these, then we have some inefficiencies created by, obviously, educational choice programs. The less transportation is based upon geography, and the more it's based upon program choice, the less efficient that it becomes. Special education is an excellent example of that. Programs are not geographically based, and you have to transport children long distances. You've made some exceptions based upon safety and other things, or attendance boundary planning that causes some transportation to be inefficient. And then you have a very high demand for activity trips, and that's fairly common in districts like Boulder, and we have given the team some strategies maybe to mitigate that. You have an aging fleet. You're right at 10 years average age, and you bought quite a few buses in the last year, or it would be measured even older than that. 54 of the buses are 1994 model years and older. The spare ratio is at 31%, and typically a best practice is around 15. We did target some schools for run consolidation, gave those consolidation opportunities to Dave and his team in February, and they looked at them pretty hard, but without more time between the bells, there's probably not really an opportunity to consolidate these runs until we can create some more time. The main facility here is fairly crowded, and your pavement at almost all your lots could stand some repair and maintenance. And finally, the student information system, Infinite Campus, does not interact real well with Edgelog, primarily because address entry occurs inconsistently. And it's because the building staff will enter a street name in a fashion that's not consistent with the way the map has it. And when that happens, the student can't be found. So the typical solution we see for this, not to get into the weeds too much, is drop-down boxes as opposed to letting people just name the streets themselves. And that advice has been given in the report to the people that can deal with it. For your purposes, some round numbers, some approximate numbers, it costs about $86,000 a year to operate and provide capital for a regular route bus, a regular ed bus. Special needs, slightly higher at $91,000. Your cost per student, which is about double the national average, is $1,600, and your cost per student special needs is $18,000. Very typical for districts, and Boulder's no exception. 40% of the buses provide transportation to only 10% of the kids that ride. That's special education. That's a problem for everyone, and hard to overcome the needs and the programs and all the competing priorities that go with special education. So in order to understand more where we stood and what we could do to get the cost per student closer to where we want it to be, we did some comparisons with some Colorado districts, and this slide is not as tough to read as it may appear. The green line represents Boulder on 2 cost lines. The dotted red line is the cost per mile, which is a reasonable cost comparison metric. And so the dotted red line, you can see where the green line crosses that, and that would indicate that the cost per mile for Boulder is mid to upper mid cost compared to its peers. Not unusual. It's fine, particularly for the age of the fleet. It's probably right where it should be. The blue line, however, represents the cost per pupil, and among all these Colorado districts, Boulder is the highest. So we need to understand why that occurs when operating costs seem to be in line, but the cost per pupil is so high. So we took a look at the time and seat utilization by school, and this is where every driver participated in this process. Every driver kept a log for a day for what they did, and we could back this up with some GPS information to determine its accuracy. And again, not to dwell on this for too long, but each one of the blue bars represents a school bus and its seating capacity. The yellow represents how many kids were on the bus that day. The red line represents the time that was available to that individual bus. That time varies based upon its next obligation. And the blue line is the actual time taken. And so what you see is For example, there, bus number 59, while it didn't haul very many children, it doesn't have a lot of time to do it. And that's the challenge you have within your system. Your system is very time constrained, very time constrained. So we tried to do a snapshot of the bell times in Boulder Valley, and it was a challenge. We consolidated it as much as we could, and the design of the system is intended to be what we would call a three-tier system. That is, the bus is trying to achieve a circuit that would allow it to pick up 3 schools in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. What this chart lays out for you is the length of the school day by type, and then when the schools open and when the schools close. And you can see that the length of the school day begins to really present a challenge in the afternoon. We can kind of deliberately open buildings in the morning and create time for the buses to run, but in the afternoon, because the different lengths of day gets to be much more complicated, and you have many more buses transporting kids at the same time and not able to make multiple circuits. So this is a very tough problem with only 1 hour available in the afternoon. What we would like to see is this time in the afternoon that's identified as an hour should be about an hour and a half. And then you could see significantly fewer buses operated. Another way of looking at this picture is the utilization of the buses in the afternoon. And the red bars represent how many buses are running at any particular time with a child on the bus. You're operating 176 buses, that's the blue line across the top, throughout the afternoon. You never reach 120 buses simultaneously transporting kids. You have roughly 50 buses all the time waiting to go to the next job because the bells just aren't coordinated well enough. So this drove us to our recommendations, and here's what we have recommended to the team, and they're considering now. Dave's already completed his investigation of the 15 schools where we had some consolidation opportunities, and we agree with him that until we get some more time, it's going to be difficult to achieve any consolidations. Adopt a 3-tier balanced school bell schedule. We understand that is not as easy as us just saying it. That's a community involvement, a stakeholder involvement process that would take a considerable amount of time. We've recommended the disposal of all the 94 models and older, about 54 buses, and reduce the spare ratio accordingly. Adopt some strategies to mitigate the prime time activity trips, and then evaluate the cost benefit of some of your transportation exceptions for safety and that sort of thing that may have outgrown the reason that those exceptions existed. Upgrade the facilities, both the grounds and the space, and then finally, didn't touch on this, but this is probably the largest district we've been in the last 4 or 5 years that does not have video cameras in each one of their buses. It's a very common practice now, and it has multiple benefits. It protects children from, frankly, one another. It also verifies how well the drivers are handling their discipline challenges, and it provides a much more efficient process for handling discipline issues and collaborating with parents and principals on how we're going to return the bus to a safe environment. So it's a very powerful tool, widely used, and as we've recommended, as money becomes available, it should be a strategy that you pursue. I think the beauty of the recommendations we put forth is we're not talking about denying anybody service. The service will continue as it is. We think the impact of consolidation, if we have enough time, could change operating expenses or reduce them by about $500,000 a year. We believe if you could achieve a 3-tier bell time system, it would result in 40 buses being reduced and about $2.5 million of annual costs, or roughly how much money you are probably subsidizing the transportation out of the general funds now. Disposal of the 1994 models, Bob and I have gone back and forth on this, but we know it would save the $500,000, but he's concerned that he can't maintain the readiness and the responsiveness that the Boulder Valley School District needs out of its transportation department, particularly with regard to extra trips. So this has to be a collaborative effort between principals and transportation, athletic directors, and everyone that has a stake in that as well to save this sort of money. You not only save the maintenance on these older buses, but the liability insurance premiums that are associated with every bus in the fleet goes down. So the total savings doesn't add up to $3.5 million because some of these things are not mutually exclusive, but I think a reasonable target over the next few years and an incremental approach should be an annual savings of $3 million. Of course, the facility upgrades would not only allow the system to continue to operate well, it helps you avoid a number of issues with regard to employee safety and then your efficiency and the ability to accommodate growth. So this sort of represents the end of the report, and I'd be happy to take any questions or concerns.
Dr.
So
Messer?
I would just add, probably should have done this in the preface, but I will do it now, and then I think that might help with some of the questions. So where we are, and thank you, Kyle, for the presentation. Where we are as a system is, well, one, we want to bring this to you, so you have the most recent information from this analysis. And then working with Don Orr and Bob Young and our team, we met with Cabinet today and went through this and had some conversation. We meet with Budget Advisory Council tomorrow afternoon, presentation discussion. What we would plan to do is go to work on a management plan on staging proposed strategies to implement these recommendations. And that doesn't mean we'll do them all. That doesn't mean we'll do them all at once. But what it would involve is how we walk into this over time, if we want to, and what are the implications of the changes that would be necessary to realize these efficiencies and savings, and what are then the implications both at the district and the school level, and begin to put that on a timeline, bring that back to the board, and then just say, well, so year one, so as soon as 13, 14, these are things that we think we could do, and these would be the implications and the strategies we'd want to take. We, as member of Cabinet, Tina Mew sits with us on Cabinet, and Principal Representative Kent Kruger was with us today. So, I mean, we clearly understand that this is not only a district discussion, this is also a school level discussion, and how do we manage that? So our next steps would be to build, probably a multi-year management plan, and we can choose in time how aggressive we want to be and what are the implications of that or not. And there might be items in this set of recommendations that we might not ever choose to do because the culture of what we want to accomplish in the district isn't compatible, and we talked about that today too, and I think they certainly understand that. The other thing I would add is that we probably haven't, at least in recent history, had this kind of an analysis completed on our transportation system. So going forward, the option with our consultants would be to refresh this data from time to time. Be much easier the second time, I'm told, than the first time, because the structure's there. But then we can say, if we want to accomplish this three-tier system and we want to see these kinds of efficiencies, then are we actually seeing that over time? And or if we make some decisions for all the right reasons, but it takes us off our path, then we don't have to wait 10 years to figure that out. So I think continuing the analysis over time, not every year, could be helpful to us just in our management and maintaining efficiency of transportation systems. The other area that we are not embedded in this recommendations, but we've had conversation about is that we have, as you know, a number of charter and focus schools that are not a part of our transportation system. We've had conversation with administrators in those sites about how might we incorporate them, and could that be potentially on a fee basis? But again, how would we offset that cost? Because it would potentially add more routes, but might be a really valuable service to families, and might help take some private vehicles off the road and increase safety overall for students. So it's not a chapter in this book yet, but it's one that we want to work on. This set of data, I think, will help us as we plan for the future. But the management plan is probably the part I wanted most introduced here to let you know that this is really a good starting point for our planning going forward. So, Jim, with that, I think I'd be ready to answer questions.
Nice. A lot of information. Board members? Leslie?
I found this very fascinating. Thank you. Just two comments. First of all, I know in one of the community engagement sessions, we did have parents that were worried about safety on the buses, and certainly I think a video camera might be a good idea, although adding expense, but I think it's something that we should definitely consider. The other thing is, I've heard from a lot of parents, and I know we've all seen buses, he said, a bus comes and picks up one kid in the neighborhood and trucks him off somewhere, and it's a big bus and it's empty, and I said, well, he's probably special ed. But, there are a lot of buses rattling around that look pretty empty, and people wonder, what's going on here?
Well, as the graph shows, they're out of time. Part of the problem is they only have 25, 30 minutes. Then they have to wrap up what they're doing and get on into the building. So creating more time with bell times. The other time, school buses are only full from the last stop into the school, and in the afternoon from the school to the first stop, then they're becoming less full. So it's a snapshot most of the time what folks are getting.
Right. So I'm just curious, how in the world, so you say nationally, most districts have 3 bell times in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, so that would be 6 bell times. How did we get up to 50?
We've provided a lot of autonomy and choice, and we really haven't systemically tried to address this, which will make getting there probably more difficult because we all become accustomed to what we know and what we've had, and I think we've had it for a long time. So that'll be that implications part I talked about with the management plan. I think some will be less difficult or painful, some may be more, but we do not have uniformity of length of school day within levels either. And that compounds this problem because having a common start time with all elementary schools, say, but if you have 12 different lengths of school days, that's probably an exaggeration, but we definitely have differences, then what you benefit from having a common start time might be lost in the fact that you don't have uniform length of school day. So there's just a number of issues over time. So I don't know the answer to your question, let's say how did we get here, except that it just hasn't been a priority. We haven't worked on uniformity. Maybe we didn't see a reason to or motivated to do it. Part of our conversation going forward, I think, with our community is there is motivation now. We need the resources and give a little to get a little. And so some of what we'll want to talk about in the management plan is where does the benefit go? If we save X number of dollars, does it just go, where does it go? And there are needs in schools, and so an initial consideration, if we can get those resources to the schools, not just that individual school, but collectively for literacy teachers or class size or whatever our needs are, then I think that might be a way both to help address our budget needs, burden off of general fund for instructional services, and also benefit directly to students and families. And so might be an easier conversation to have if we can turn around and say this is exactly how we'd like to reinvest these dollars, and because it will impact schools and students and staff.
Yeah, well, I was shocked to look at this graph to see that there are so many different school day lengths. I was under the assumption that elementary goes X amount of time and middle X, Y, and high school's Z. So I think
I worked
this
through that
is
same adjustment a year ago. Let's say.
this is an important conversation to have with our community. And then just the last question, I'm wondering what are considered prime time activities? Are those field trips during the day and athletics, or just field trips during the day?
It's basically trips that occur once, in your case, the first schools are released. So you have the buses conducting their routes and simultaneously typically high schools going off to athletic events and that sort of thing. A common strategy is to, and Bob has one, but it's not very accurate because it didn't need to be because it's not taken seriously. A pricing mechanism where there's a certain price on a per hour and per mile basis for the use of that bus if you're off prime time. If you're on prime time, there's a wholly different price. And it encourages maybe some thinking and planning and consolidating of the number of buses and that sort of thing, so that maybe multiple teams don't get in multiple buses, and that sort of thing. So again, it's a collaborative effort, and one needs to understand the impact. It's a real cost to have these buses operate at the same time the regular route buses are. And it also drives some unintended consequences in that eventually, while he has the buses, he doesn't have the drivers. And so mechanics start to drive, dispatchers start to drive, and that's very expensive because they aren't being productive, particularly your maintenance force is not being productive, and then they come back to make up their lost work time at time and a half. That's very expensive utilization of human resources.
Great. Well, I'm glad we took this study on.
Jenny?
I'm looking at this and thinking, I'm sort of remembering back to last spring, and if we had even half of this money, if we had $1.5 million, we would have had such an easier time. Our job would have been so much less painful, and there would be so many things that we could do. I'm really eager to see us working to see what's feasible and what we can really do in this district. And I would hope we can do some work. I mean, it looks to me like there's huge savings around sort of standardizing our bell schedules, and the educational benefit of spending money on a literacy teacher as compared to a bus that runs an idiosyncratic bus schedule seems to me to be kind of a no-brainer. So I'm really kind of excited about the potential, and just for our taxpayers. I mean, it's part of our job not to spend money as efficiently as we can, even if we have more resources. I feel like this is not necessarily the best use of taxpayer money, and so the benefit to our community of being as efficient as we can with our resources, I think, will earn us back in trust when we go out and ask for additional resources. So this is great. Thank you very much. That's not a question, I know, but.
Well, and if I tried to get through this rather quickly, but the impact of this really won't have even, your turnover rate among your drivers is typical. If you eliminate 40 buses over time with these bell time changes, nobody's job will be impacted. You just won't hire as many new drivers. I mean, this is a solution with a lot of gain and not a lot of pain, except for the principals and the parents that are impacted by a change in bell times.
Well, and I know change is difficult, but I would really hope that if parents see some educational benefit to their students,
Sure.
that they would be willing to do this. And when I think back to when I was a parent at a school, we changed schedules for reasons that were a total mystery to me. This wouldn't even be a mystery. I could get behind this. I could have gotten behind this, so.
Thanks, Jenny. Sam?
Report, could somebody email us
Yeah,
this?
we'll email you the PowerPoint.
Thanks.
We just want to finalize it this afternoon, we'll get to.
And I'm sure we could volunteer to drive, many of them. And I was going to ask you about the job elimination, and so I'm glad to hear that it could be done without anybody putting anybody out of work.
When you agree your turnover rate is such that.
Yeah. So, and I understand your point very well, and I think it's the right one, that if we're going to cause disruption in families with standardizing bell times, we need to be clear about the monies going into the classroom. And we also have a sustainability goal of, reducing our carbon footprint is another benefit. Two things I didn't hear addressed in the report I just want to ask you about quick. Did you consider smaller buses, and did we consider lengthening the distance from school where you qualify for a bus ride?
Eligibility, we didn't consider. That is always, that's a very painful one. Once you start changing who's eligible for school bus rides, that one will make bell times look pretty easy. And I think you have some issues too, that you want accessibility. You want these kids to easily get to school. You have within the district socio and economic challenges that kids given the opportunity to walk to school may never get to school. They'll just wander off. So that's an issue. And the smaller bus, the utility of the bus itself and the difference in the price isn't that great. So you buy a bus and your incremental investment, it doesn't offset the loss of utility in using the larger bus. Particularly if you get the bell times, you'll run the bus longer, it will become more full. So I think the bus sizing is about right.
Now, if I may, one of the things we strive for is versatility of buses. And if that bus is going to serve 3 schools, it may serve 50 kids at one school, but may only serve 20 at a next school. So rather than trying to put another bus on the road, you try to have the versatility of that. And as Kyle said, the cost of the bus, the difference in a large bus and a slightly smaller one isn't that much different, and neither is the amount of mileage you get out of them. It's that versatility is where you get the efficiency. So that's what we strive for.
I would think, Sam, I would just add, I think when we can have walkable distances and so safe routes to school, all that effort we're putting, which helps with our sustainability, helps with fitness. I mean, I just want you to know that we haven't lost sight of that. That's work that we continue to do. And there was a recent situation with one of our schools where there was some question that came up on our community engagement. And so, again, working on safe routes, we do a safety analysis on those routes. And some of it is working with children and parents to change behavior so that so they don't wander off or they don't make it, and they're also not in an unsafe situation. That then is a community effort, not just a school district, working with our cities and having good sidewalks and all of those kinds of things. But we've not lost sight of that, and clearly, if it's a walkable distance and a safe walkable distance, as opposed to taking the private vehicle, we would encourage, that's a good first option. But having them not come to school is not a good next option. So we are working on that.
Not included in the slide presentation, but within the report, we commend the district also on its alternative transportation program. Bob and the team have utilized grants to finance a couple staff members who are finding kids ways to school who aren't eligible for the bus. And it's a very proactive and very unusual. And it's minimal impact on the environment and some of the other things that they're doing. It's quite a nice approach to this.
Tom?
Yeah, this is very interesting. Thanks for the data. It's always good to have the data to see where you are. I know there are going to be some consequences if we go to a tiered system like this. So I'm looking forward to this report as to what those consequences will be. Certainly having some elementary schools start at 7:50 and others at 8:40 is a big gap, and we hear all the time about schools starting too early and not getting enough sleep for students and all that sort of stuff. So there's going to be challenges around this. And do you have a feeling as when you may have a chance to analyze all these things and get a plan back to us, or at least an interim plan that would help address some of these consequences that we don't foresee?
So I think an interim plan is the right question, Tom. So what we've talked about informally is that clearly for it to have value to the budget planning process, then that timeline in April and May as we plan for June adoption. So that's just a consideration. So to at least have a ballpark number that we think that we could, so Bill Sutter's been a part of this conversation, that we could introduce. And we might just do it as a tentative, a placeholder. And then also say if we were going to achieve that level of relief, then what would we have to do first, and what are the implications, and then give ourselves time before the school year ends to have the appropriate community engagement that Kyle described. So, I don't think we're in such a tight timeline we can't do anything by next fall, but it's also not November either. And so what we don't want to do is stumble and fall on our first step out of this. So we want to do it right, and if that might mean incrementally a smaller step than we might like to take, but do it well, then maybe subsequent steps would be easier. But I think in the next month to 6 weeks, we'd at least be able to lay out a framework of what that could look like. And again, we need to work back with our principals and school communities. And again, if it's changes aren't a big deal, in some cases, I feel like they could adjust pretty easy. But then to get the full effect of the efficiency that Kyle described, we might say it would take us two planning seasons to get there. I'm just sort of making that up. But that's the kind of flexibility we'd want to at least look at. And then what can we do with these spare buses or the older buses? And some of that we could begin to move on. I want you to know, and I think we've talked about this, the capital planning for the facility, Don Orr and his team are incorporating in our work on the bond planning. So our SIPSI committee so that's a longer term bond investment that would help some of the recommendations here. We understand that that's a cost, and we understand it's probably out of ways, but this is helpful for us as we do that planning.
I would also like to see an investigation of how rolling some of these savings back into transportation to make upgrades, for example, video cameras or bus replacements, things like that, as opposed to just give me the money, such that program can be more sustainable over a period of time. I think that's one thing to look at very carefully too, because otherwise we won't be getting the savings we think we're getting, because we'll be then subsidizing back because we didn't do those sorts of things. So I'd encourage you to have that as part of the planning process as well.
The district I worked at before, we had cameras in all the buses, so what Kyle describes as far as the value and utility, I would just affirm. We'd had it in place for a couple of years, really is helpful for training and follow-up on discipline issues and safety. I mean, I just recall one occasion, we had a student that was missing, and so the question, can we affirm that he or she ever got on the bus? Do we know exactly what stop they got off the bus? And simply by going into the data set, we were able to got off on the wrong stop, but we were able to identify the child was on. I mean, that's just a little example, but, that's harder to do when you've got a lot of things going on. But it was pretty easy to do with that camera over the doorway watching the child exit the bus, and then that helped us focus our search for the child.
Yeah, that's very important. That happened actually to my younger son when he started kindergarten. He got off the stop too early. Of course, we were panicked, and driving all around the fine. But being able to call and say, where did he get off, and know right away would have definitely helped that situation.
So it can be our friend, I think, if it's done well. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Lori?
Thank you for this report. I'm interested to see your, the written report and the PowerPoint that you gave, but it was a lot of good information. And I remember that a couple of years ago, it started with the Budget Advisory Committee, that there were a bunch of parents who were really concerned about this issue about transportation and looked into it. And then we made the recommendation last spring, and here you are following up. So while it always feels really slow to me that I wish, how come we can't do it next week? It's really good to be thoughtful and in-depth, and so thank you. I appreciated Tom's comments about what's the management plan and how should we roll this out and look at it. But I'm real excited to see it, and thank you for doing this. Thank you and Bob for your work on this.
Yeah, I'll add my voice to that. I'd like to see the management plan. I think as far as changing the bell times around, I know some schools may be less accepting of that as others. I do know that we have some feeder systems that are well aligned, and perhaps we can think of ways to bring them into the first year by offering them something. One thing I did hear Dr. Messenger say, which kind of piqued my interest, was the possibility of offering some type of bus service to some of our charter and focus schools. And again, kind of following up and building on what I heard here, which is, we could get some kids who wouldn't be going to those schools to go to those schools if we had a bus going to them, which, could help in continued de-stratification. But I realized that was just kind of a piece in there. The real exciting thing here is that there's money to be gained from efficiency, and that we've got a group that was not afraid to say, please come take a look at how we can be more efficient. My hat's off. Those audits are never fun, but you've obviously went at it with a lot of gusto, looking at the benefit for kids in the end, so thank you.
Actually, I enjoyed it. I really did. Yeah.
Nice.
And he was a great host, very cooperative. It was great.
Good job. Thank you very much.
So if I could just on that point, Bob has been an eager, active participant. I mean, so I don't want you to think Bob has been asleep at the wheels and that's why we have something. The reality is we had created a really service-oriented culture, which is not a bad thing. But so maybe that's the answer to your question, Leslie, earlier, is how did we get here? So Bob and I, as we got to know each other, we engaged in these conversations, and he just said, I think there's some savings here, but there are going to be some prices we pay for that. So I said, well, let's take a look. And so I just want you to know this is a shift in how we've done business. It doesn't mean we can't still be service-oriented and also be efficient, but I just want you to know that that's some of what Bob inherited when he came into the system and has continued to support. So, and we've already made some changes. You might recall our discussion last year about transportation for homeless students and the cost associated with that. I mean, we've already realized upwards of $400,000 in savings by some changes that have occurred this year around that, and some change in practices and some efficiencies, again, with several people on staff working on that, including Bob, so, and Bon Shepherd, so, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think given the time, maybe we can take a 3-minute break for the board real quick and come right back. It's a good stopping point. Thanks. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. Welcome back. Our next item for discussion tonight is the Draft School Finance Act update. Dr. Messenger?
President Reed, members of the board, thank you. We placed this item on the agenda for this evening as an information item last week, not knowing for sure what the timeline would be with the introduction of the bill, Senate Bill 213, and not knowing if we'd have the data regarding the allocation of resources. So we have both. So we had some time since the end of last week and tonight to prepare. So what Leslie Stafford, Chief Financial Officer, is home. She has pneumonia. So which we're sure that wasn't just to miss a board meeting. We think that'd be extreme. So anyway, we hope Leslie's getting well. She's probably pushing herself too hard. So Bill Sutter and I worked today to pull some information together. So our purpose tonight really is to share with you some context. Much of this you may have some understanding of. We've talked about some of these points, but now that the bill's actually been introduced, we think we have a better sense of not only what it means for schools across the state potentially, if it's approved by the legislature and the vote is positive in the fall, but specifically what does it mean for Boulder Valley School District, to give some context to what the potential implications are as we go forward. So that's our purpose tonight. We've laid at your place just a single sheet that is, again, some of this with the 170 plus pages, it gets kind of complex. And so we wanted to back this back out. And so this is just, if it's helpful, great. If you want it electronically, we can do that. It doesn't have anything very specific at all to BVSD. So we'll add that context. And so maybe it merges into a new document as we go forward. So Bill, do you want to bring the PowerPoint up? As you know, we have been involved in this discussion really since summer when we first went down and met with Senator Johnston and had this conversation when it was still very conceptual. And then we've invited ourselves to every meeting, even meetings we maybe weren't invited to participate in this discussion. And I'm talking about we being our lobbyists, Briggs, Leslie, Bill, several of us have really seized every opportunity to get our voice in this process. So if we want to pull the slides up, we don't have this PowerPoint for you at your place, but we will make it available. So we thought we'd walk through what some of the notable increases are. So we've appropriately recognized Ed News for a number of these data sets and information. Ed News is an excellent resource as we go forward on this as well. They've done a nice job capturing it. So just the bullet points is, so what we know, but I'll repeat, is this proposed School Finance Act will be before the legislature within a week, within committee for consideration. If approved by this legislature going forward, that it will only be enacted, whatever it looks like in the end, it will only be enacted if approved by the legislature with a successful vote in the fall, in November, that would generate $1 billion of additional new revenue that would go in combination with what's already in the School Finance Act to implement this. So it's a trigger, and if we don't have a successful election in the fall, if approved by the legislature, then we retain our present School Finance Act. So it doesn't go away. This isn't implemented until 15-16. So not this coming year, not the next year, but 15-16. So that's just if everything goes according to what's been proposed. So $1 billion, if approved by the voters. What it talks about is a $600 per student grant to districts for implementing reform laws. So that's been clearly stated. Now, what we'll show you is not every district gets $600 in the end, but there is an allocation of $600 that's now called Teacher Leader Investment. It was called Colorado Education Investment. Same, different tag, but same dollar, $600 across the board for each student to implement the reform efforts that have been approved by our legislature. And then there's $100 million that is for innovation fund for districts, and the money is to be earmarked for longer school days and longer school years for school districts that are turnaround status. The way it's written right now, Boulder Valley would not be eligible to compete for these dollars, but there's $100 million that's allocated. We've worked hard on this one, this bullet. Right now, there's proposed $80 million increase for special education for funding of students with more severe disabilities. The handicapping condition of children receiving special education services is sort of layered, and this is the mid layer that their funding formula. So it would, to give this context, the study that was released about a month ago, there's $475 million of expenses across the state that school districts have for special education that should be reimbursed that are not being reimbursed. So there's a deficit of $475 million of expenses. As a school district, we spend $30 million a year out of our general fund for services in combination with $6 million of federal dollars for special education services. Those dollars, service costs that aren't reimbursed by the state, so we're some part of that $475 million, comes out of that same general fund that we do all the other things we try to do with. So we've advocated for a greater amount of money in this category. This $80 million is equivalent to about $100 per student, Bill, for all students, not just children with special education services. So it does increase, supports our base. This $80 million does. We had proposed $220 million, $225 million, which would almost be half of the $475 million. So getting halfway there, clearly that would help raise the base for all school districts. Not every district has the same special education expenses, obviously, because of size of district, but generally they are proportionate. So a larger district like Jefferson County, Boulder, Adams 12, Yuma, I mean, it's all proportionate to the size of the district for the most part. So we think this could be a win-win if we can get more dollars over time. There's an allocation of $6 million to provide additional career opportunities for highly effective teachers. This is part of the innovation aspect of this, trying to support schools, particularly in rural areas that struggle with the attraction and retention of teachers in specialized areas. Again, probably not much benefit for BVSD. $5 million to launch a new student count system. Presently, you know, we count students one time a year in October. That drives our funding for that year. This is designed over time. This would be a phased-in implementation that there would be, is it 4 slices?
Yes.
4 slices, where they take count 4 times a year, but it's based on average daily membership. So just divide the year into 4 parts. And then whenever that first slice is, it isn't just on that day. It actually goes back and says, was that student a member of the district? So if it's a fourth of a year, 45 days, okay? Of the 45 days that lead to that count, were they in membership the whole time? And if they were only in membership a portion of that time, then we'd get a proportionate amount of funding for that student. So it's not attendance, it's membership. So membership has to be defined, how we collect that data, how the state captures it, how they use it is totally not developed. This is a desire, $5 million allocation to create it. You want to add to this, Bill? Go ahead.
There's one other piece, is
Okay.
that it's for the coming year.
Yes.
So it's defines the funding for the next year, not for the current year, like the October count does now.
So some concern about the districts like ours that are dependent on about a 1% growth. In the present year, we plan for the use of those dollars that we'll receive because we need to have services for those 260 more children or whatever. If growth is great enough, greater than 1%, however, great enough, then there can be some appeal process with that, and they also do a rolling average for declining enrollment. So, I mean, so this has been, we had a lot of conversation around this. And so the mechanism of doing this, although part of to give credit to those who proposed this is a way to, so schools that enroll students by October and don't educate them all year, they'll be penalized with this because they won't count them through the year. So that's one side of this equation. The other side is if a new student enrolls, an at-risk student, into the year, or any student, and then you pick up funding for the last 45 days, whereas now you'd have to wait till the next October. The overall analysis of this strategy will be a cost savings to the state. They don't plan, this will save money for the state. So there's a number associated with that, I don't recall.
2.1%, they've reduced expected student counts by 2.1% as a reduction of.
So, because right now, schools are getting money for the full year, and the children really aren't there for the full year. So there'll be some recoup of 2.1% is what they've estimated. Okay, so that's a project. So this slide, you'll have to focus since we don't have this one on your laptop or on your desktop, but this is the analysis that comes out of Ed News that says, so if this were implemented the way it's being proposed and we successfully voted for $1 billion of additional revenue. What are the implications? So what you see in the column, these are the districts that Ed News used. There are neighboring districts. It's the Denver metro area. You recognize all those districts there, or nearby, or comparable size district like D11. So if you look at those, you can see where we are presently in base funding and what it would become under the new allocation for base funding. So this does not include mill levy overrides. This is base funding, a portion of which is paid by the state, a portion of which is collected locally. That's a whole nother discussion we're not going into tonight. Then you can see what the change would be for each of those respective districts. These are ordered from highest gain to lowest gain. So you can see that Aurora, $1,387 per student growth, or about a 20% growth, all the way down to the lowest gainer benefiter of this is Douglas County with $371, or about a 6% gain. BVSD is just one notch above that, and so our projected gain as a result of this is $387 per student if we assume full implementation of full-day kindergarten. So this is the revenue side, not the expense side, but get about a 6% gain. We'll just keep clicking through these and you can stop. So the other thing we wanted to look at is where are we per pupil revenues for our district after this happens, if it were to happen as it's being proposed. And so again, looking at base funding, right now with our analysis, others' analysis that we're bringing to you, is that Boulder would be the 8th lowest funded district in the state. So all 178 school districts, we'd be the 8th lowest in the district with our PPR basis, per pupil revenue basis. Okay, that's base funding. We would be $575 below the new state average of $7,459. So the new state average for PPR would be $74.59. We would be $574 below that. Currently, we are 35th lowest under the governor's proposal for next year. At $64.98 was what we will be next year, and that would be 35th. So clearly, on PPR base funding, we dropped from 35th in the state to lowest to 8th lowest, keeping in mind that we have 178 school districts in the state. Currently $105 below the state average of PPOR, so that's just the 64.98 compared to 66.03. So that's what that is. So we said, well, how does this, so we talk a lot in this room and other rooms about the negative factor. Under our present funding mechanism, if it were fully funded under the present School Finance Act, how much more money would we have? And that's the total program, you know. And the difference between the total program and our reality is what we all call the negative factor. Okay, so that's got started a few years ago. So if this were implemented as proposed, there'd be 11 districts that would receive 50% of the negative factor back. And so they would get 50% of what that is, and that involves 177,000 students. The minimum any district would get back is 18%, so this is looking at all the school districts, 18% back of their total program, which only is 425 students. BVSD would get 43% of their total program back, or recoup the negative factor. So we're just talking about raw dollars recovery overall, which is the 6th lowest of all districts in the recovery of total program. So there are some that would recover less, Bill, but we'd be 6th lowest.
The 11 districts getting less than 50% of that negative factor back. There was one district that with 425 students at 18%, and then the rest of them under 50% were right around 39, 40, 42, 43, so right around 40%.
So 59 districts would receive 50% to 100% of the total program, so that's getting closer, between 50 and 100% recovery of the negative factor. 370,000 students. There'd be 108 school districts that would receive 100% more, 100% or more. So recoup all of the negative factor or more than that affects 299,000 students. And some of the extremes are as high as 300% recovery. So part of what the reason this matters to us, and I know that there are folks who are not interested in this conversation when we keep bringing it up, but the reason it matters to us is because if just for the sake of discussion, we would say the present funding formula, if funded, over $1 billion for the state, but if it were funded for BVSD, we think that gets us closer to adequacy for all students. Anything less than getting there means that we're not getting we're just not getting closer to adequate. We're not sure that it even gets us to adequacy if we had the $36 million negative factor recouped. That's what our number is, $36 million. But if we only get halfway there, then we're pretty sure if the $36 million wouldn't get us to adequacy, halfway there isn't getting us in. I mean, it's getting us closer, I guess, but it's not getting us there. So our argument all along when we've looked at this formula is that we understand the value of differentiating and maybe giving a higher weight to students who are most at risk. You know, philosophically, we get that. We even get that. Practically, we get that. But what do you give up to get that? And so some of our argument has been don't lower the floor, or don't not raise the floor so much to get these other factors done that we lose our work towards adequacy as our school district or other districts that find themselves in that same category. So that we know no one really particularly cares about this data except maybe us, but we like to look at it. And we think it has context for us deciding whether this legislation works for Boulder Valley School District and all the services we're trying to do. Okay. So in a little bit of depression and desperation, given that we haven't been very effective in turning this ship and getting more money in special ed or getting the risk factors adjusted, it really has not changed notably since November, despite our dozens and dozens of hours of work on this. And so, anyway, we're not giving up. By golly, it's just going to committee next week. But so we haven't given up, but we're not highly optimistic either. And so the conversation Bill and I had this morning, so under this new School Funding Act as proposed, what other options might we have to go to our voters and say, this bill doesn't do it for us and we need more resources? So, you know, we're at the max with our index mill levy override, you know that. And that is protected in this legislation, which Bill and Leslie and others worked really hard on, which we can answer questions about if there are. But can we go get more money if we need it? So these are some options under this School Finance Act. There's a technology maintenance and operations levy option. We could ask for up to $30 million of additional cost. And again, I give credit to Bill and Leslie and others who worked on this. This would be a new provision that doesn't exist today that would be directed towards our capital improvement costs that now either just don't get done, or they go into a bond, or they compete with textbooks and teachers. I mean, that's the only, this would give us another avenue of ongoing funding through 100% local dollars through a mill levy override. Cost of living. One of the reasons we don't receive $600, even though there's a $600 per student, is because districts got to dig down in the hole a little bit before they got to come back out again. And so the reason we only have $384 instead of $600 or more is because there are factors that were taken away. Size factor, there was a factor for size of district, we lose that. And all districts do in the state except those that are 4,300 students or less lose that. We lost in that. And then our cost of living factor that we received, we lost that, as all districts did. So, but there's a provision in the proposed legislation where school districts could go back and ask the voters to recoup that amount of money. And the amount of money that is in our cost of living factor that will just go away, this is both negative factor plus what we actually get. We actually get around $11 million for cost of living.
Between that and the size.
And size.
Yeah.
So that goes away. So we lose that $11 million. But we could go back to the voters and ask, we're not proposing doing these all at one time. I just want to make this clear. We're just laying out options so that you know what options there are. So we could go back to where we should be for cost of living under the total program, and that for us right now is $40 million. So there is a limit to how much you can go for, but the limit for BVSD appears to be $40 million because that's what it is today if we realize that full cost of living. So those are a couple of options that we can go to the voters, one for kind of a specific purpose, the other really to help general fund support. And then we do have the option of going for transportation. So this gets a little wrapped around our earlier presentation, is that right now we're subsidizing the transportation budget by about $2.4 million right now. Money we just talked about, right? So if for some reason we couldn't recover all that through our last presentation, or some portion of it, one thing we could do is go to our voters and ask for a transportation override in addition to what we already received as a transportation levy and move those costs into that transportation levy and free up money in the general fund. So that's a strategy. That's not a new strategy. That's been around for a while. And that's probably it. Is that the end of the slideshow? That's good. We ran out of time. The last slide was really, if this is the plan going forward, and if it passes and we get behind supporting this, I mean, we've been in meetings where people have come to us say, is this going to fully satisfy our needs? Is this going to make us full? And we don't think so. Because some of the things we had hoped for aren't in here, and we're still working on. So the question is, well, if not this, then what more might we be able to, are we just against the wall? And so, we've said, well, there would be some other options. And so we just wanted to put that last slide there so that we could look at that. So I think that's about where we are, trying to work through this. I had a conversation. So there's a couple things we're working on. One is this has been quite a journey for us. One is that for every student who qualifies for at-risk factor for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, so for BVSD, a student gets base funding. If they qualify for free and reduced, the district gets 1.2 times that. If the concentration in the school district exceeds the state average over 45%,
by a 50% above that.
so it's fairly complicated, but we finally got our lesson on the spreadsheet today over the phone. But anyway, but the point would be is that districts who have high concentration of poverty, the factor goes to something bigger than 1.2. It says 1.4, but it's really not 1.4. So that's what we figured out today. It's really not 1.4, but it's a number bigger than 1.2. And so we had been working with Senator Johnson's staff to say, well, what if that wasn't by district? What if it's by school? Because Sanchez Elementary, just as one example, we have others, it's a highly impacted by poverty. That building will generate a certain amount because they're in BVSD. If that same building said in Adams 12 or Denver Public Schools, it would generate not double the amount, but more than what it does now because it would be in a high concentration district just because of the way they built the factors. So we've said maybe rather than building it by school district, maybe we ought to build it by school. So that's a big homework assignment that they're working on. They've run it for Boulder. Now we've asked to see it for Denver or Aurora because part of what it does is moves money over to the gets it to schools, and then it's going to, so if you have a low poverty building in a high concentration district, then they won't receive that weighted factor if they're a low poverty school in a high concentration district. Today they would, but with this, by going by school, so it shifts the money. May free up some money as well that could maybe go into special ed. So anyway, we're working on that right now. That's one strategy. Sorry, I know, that was way too much. And then the other conversation we've had with some of our peer districts that find themselves in a similar situation is what if we just said, just keep working on this until we get every student in every school district is at least $600. So there'd be no one less than $600. So when we really say we're doing $600 for school reform initiatives, without exception, we can go to any district in this state and they got at least 600. Ours is what, 384 right now. So, and there are others that are below 600. How do we get everybody at least to 600, which means some of the other ones probably have to come down so we can fit in $1 billion. Okay? Bill, anything more you want to add?
New information comes out fairly regularly. We had another posting from CDE today. So if we do get around to this again, there'll be probably some more shifting numbers. So don't get too stuck on any particular number.
Yeah, that's where. The other thing that I will say, Bill and Leslie and others, if it just Briggs, they've all been great. Tanya and Ernestine, this is daily work. But the other thing that occurred to us that we really need to look at some modeling around this. What are the implications of this proposed School Finance Act in 5 years? No modeling has been done for the future. So we're in conversation with others in the state right now about contracting for modeling of this School Finance Act. So what will this look like, not just for BVSD, but for all schools in 5 years? And how will that compare what our present School Finance Act looks like in 5 years? To build these models, you have to make some assumptions. And so you determine what factors you have to manipulate, and then you have to make some assumptions. And then you can vary those assumptions. So you have to make assumptions like cost of living, percentage of revenue comes in based, in proportionate to cost of living. So, these can be modeled, and we really think they need to be modeled so that when folks ask us questions about does this where does this take us? Where will we be in 5 years or 7 years or 10 years? We can at least better answer that, at least with some assumptions. Probably work that needed to be done on the old School Finance Act, but we certainly think it needs to be done now and put the two side by side and look at it. So that, we hope that's work that can be done this spring. So be glad to answer questions, take comment. It's a work in progress.
And thank you for the presentation. I know we've all been highly interested in what this looks like and not necessarily having enough time to read and process the bill, which came across Friday afternoon. You guys have done a great job in getting some information to us. Before I turn it over to board members, I do want to throw my opinion out there. If we were to base the school-based funding on the high concentration of risk factors, that would in fact give districts like ours the incentive to build more schools that have less diversity and stack schools, which is kind of what we unintentionally did as a district back 10 years ago, and then spent a lot of time trying to go the other way. So I'm sure there's ways to do it thoughtfully, but that would be my one observation. And with that, didn't mean to jump in first. So board members?
No, I appreciate that, Jim. That's a good point.
That's all?
So just a point of clarification, when you said we would be sixth lowest, that means we're 172 out of 178, we're at the very bottom rung?
On the PPR, yes.
Okay, so.
It's cost.
So as a taxpayer, then I would be concerned about that and also selling that to, our constituents, that, you're going to be taxed 2 or 3 times just to get us up to what we need, right? You'll get state tax and then coming back for more property taxes just to get us back up. So there seems to be a sense of disparity there that while there should be some, it seems to be excessive. And so it becomes a point of concern if this is really the best for Boulder Valley School District. I scanned through the bill in its early stages. It was 144 pages. I don't know what it is now.
177, I think.
It's how much?
170-something, I think.
It's
Isn't it?
174, I think.
Okay, 174. So it's a very complicated bill, which is another issue, and there are a lot of things that are confusing about it. For example, the $600 is not guaranteed, and that can go up or down per year per what the legislature does. So that makes it difficult too, that it's sort of outside of the guaranteed funding, and it could be none at all when we get right down to it. And I think that'll be a point of contention amongst a lot of people that will say, well, is this really better? Because it could just be back to nothing, right? So certainly I would feel better if there was a more secure guaranteed level of addressing the negative factor. To me, that's not a guaranteed, and I think it'll be viewed that way. So that would be some feedback maybe that we should bring back to them on those 2 particular points, for us. So a lot of concern, a lot of issues, but I'll stop there. That's good enough.
So one of the things, if I could, Jim, just because I know there may be, so you're right about the $600 teacher leader investment is not protected by Amendment 23, so you're right about that. Now, in the most recent version, because of a lot of input, there is a provision in it that it will grow, with some assumptions about growth in the income tax revenue that's initially approved by the voters. As that revenue grows because of the rate applied to a more robust economy and more income, it will grow. It's an index, it does. But ultimately, that's if we don't mess with it. But you're right, it does not fall under Amendment 23. It's just the base funding and things that build off the base that are really protected by Amendment 23. And this base $600 is not in the base funding. It's outside of it, so it's not. So your point is taken. I just wanted to let you know they did add a dimension that it could potentially grow as the economy gets stronger.
Shelley?
Can you help me understand the part about individual school principals having more spending authority? And also it looks like there's some shift with revenue sharing in charter schools? Does that affect us as well?
Right, so the way the bill is written is that for the risk factors that are weighted, and the money flows to districts, it would go to schools that generate that, the state's portion of it. So schools that are impacted by any of the factors, it would go to those schools as opposed to the district general fund revenue. Now, what I think we don't know today is that an accounting mechanism? So if money flowed to one of our schools because they have a high poverty count, and so we know an amount of money needs to be expended at that school, and we offer a summer school program or tutoring services developed with the school community, and we show that we're spending $20,000 on those services, and at least $10,000 more went to that school, we show that $20,000 was spent on. So clearly the intent of this is to make sure money invested in the system goes to where it's supposed to go. I mean, that's the idea, and that we don't get it and not spend it on those students and on those schools. So, I mean, we don't have any trouble getting there conceptually. I think the thing we don't know today necessarily exactly how it is we have to account for that. But clearly, if it's earmarked around a factor and it goes to a school because they have a demographic that generates that, then we're going to have to demonstrate that at least that amount of the state share was expended at that school. We understand some anxiety around local control versus state control of that. So, we've talked about that a little bit. For us to be able to demonstrate, given the way they've at least loaded the risk factors for us, it's not that much money, that we probably won't have trouble demonstrating that. Is that fair, Bill? Or maybe you want to expand on that, because you've probably been closer to that.
Yes, another piece on this is how it had been described. I don't know exactly how the language works out now, because there were some changes from the original 144 pages to the current 174, so it has changed over that period of time. But there was discussions around the state portion of that extra weight is what was following the student. So in Boulder, we're funded 70% locally. So roughly the way I would understand that is we have more control because we generate more of our money locally, whereas a district who is, say, opposite of us, who only generates 30%, that the state would have more control over that extra money because it was coming from the state. That's been one of the, statements around the state being able to control the money that is flowed from the state and not from local funds.
And to your second point, Shelley, yes, there is language in the bill regarding charter schools, both in these kinds of dollars in use in special ed and also going forward with mill levy overrides that charters receive a proportionate amount. Now, our practice in this district, both with bond and mill levy overrides, in recent years at least, has been that, I wouldn't say it's proportionate necessarily, but they've certainly been shared. They've been involved in kind of a success story around that. But that's not true in every district in the state, that those revenues aren't necessarily shared. So there is language that protects that, is my understanding, Bill, going forward. I don't know
Correct.
about-
There was some discussion about making them retroactive
Go backwards, too.
past mill levies that have been passed. So our practice has been any charter school that's in place when a mill levy passes, they participate in that. So new charters that come along don't get to participate in past overrides. But that's been our practice here locally.
Thanks, Shelley. Lori?
I'd just like to follow up on this question about what we've called backpack money for, that the money would go directly to principals, in other words, go directly to schools. Because the way I read it, and I could be wrong, but the way I read it is that that money would bypass the locally elected school boards. And in fact, the principal would have discretion as to where that money would be spent. I didn't understand it to be only an accounting question about the way it would be reported, but in fact, the principals would have the authority to spend those funds. And while Boulder Valley doesn't receive a large proportion of money from the state, I think it's a real important question about democracy and representative government. And I think that any time a school board is challenged in this way, I think it's kind of a slippery slope that people would begin to say, well, just give money to the schools and the school board becomes less relevant. And in some schools, they get a large proportion of their money from the state. And so those school boards are essentially sister school boards, lose less control over decisions that should be, it seems to me, district-wide questions. I mean, like, for instance, we just were talking today about reading programs, and we were talking about transportation. We've talked about other issues that are district-wide. And so I worry that not arguing real strenuously against this question about what I see as fundamental democracy and grassroots democracy with locally elected boards is real troubling to me, even though we're not as affected by that. So it's a piece of this that's real fundamental to me.
Yeah, I would agree.
More of a comment than a question.
No, I think that's right.
Go Sam and then Leslie.
So the $1 billion is based on income tax revenues being at a certain place in 2015, 16? Right, yeah.
What it would generate, yeah.
And if they go down, the money goes down. And is it protected for public education, or if?
Yes, it would
Totally.
become going to the education fund, so
Yeah.
it would be protected. But you're right, it's like all revenue,
Yeah.
it's subject to the economy, but yes.
Our best guess, yeah. And can either of you tell me a simple dollar figure that represents the net gain to BVSD as this is currently proposed?
14 million.
We would see 14 million more dollars in revenue under this, okay?
About 43% of our $35 million negative factor.
Actually, so Sam, that's the revenue side. Sam, maybe I heard that second part was the net.
Yeah.
We don't have an estimate on the expense side? Or-
Certainly, there's expenses out of that 14 million for full-day kindergarten, the additional. So on the preschool side, we already do preschool pretty robustly, so there could be some backfilling of those dollars. Hard to say exactly how much. I would be willing to bet there will be some additional accounting requirements coming out of this, so.
Okay, but I am trying to get to a final number to be able to know what is the,
What do you think, 10 or 11 million?
I think the full-day K will run about 4 million to do it, so 10.
so we could see a $10 million net gain to our district.
Yes, and also that would include that we'd have full-day kindergarten funded. A little nuance with that, which I think we talked about, is that even if we can't, because of space limitations, offer full-day kindergarten, if we had 2,000 students, 2,200 students, we can submit them as full-time and then work towards providing that service over a period of time. So it does generate the revenue, because there is some concern about district's capacity, just physical capacity. So Don is working with his team right now to build in physical capacity in the next bond, but that's going to be a while. And so we can't do it in all schools now. I mean, even if we had the money operationally, we just don't have the physical space. So that's just a little nuance with this bill that's actually attractive because it allows us to still get after it, and maybe we can find alternative spaces or do alternative programming with the revenue generated by counting every one of the children. The political side of this is if we're receiving the money for full-day kindergarten and I'm in a school and we say to the board, where's my full-day kindergarten? And we say, well, we can't provide it. Well, you're getting the money. Well, we are getting the money, yes. So, I mean, there's a little tension around that. I guess we just really work hard to get to that point if we were getting the revenue to be able to provide it. But we just couldn't today. We know that. We about a $7 million physical plant expansion is what we've estimated would be needed. That's pretty rough. That we might need to be able to accommodate full-day K in every one of our campuses, given what we know today.
Leslie.
So I know we're ramping up for the next bond. I mean, is that something that we're going to automatically add into another bond, is enough K classrooms?
So we'll build it in as one of the options that goes to the committee to consider, and as they work on their values and priorities. And yes, that'll be one of the areas we'll certainly add to the list of considerations that ultimately will come back to you. So.
Well, and to Tom's point, and I brought this up at the work session, I think this is going to be awfully difficult for voters to stomach the fact that we'll pay tax to get $574 less than the new average PPR, and then to get up to, the full amount, we have to yet again tax ourselves locally. I think that's going to be a pretty hard sell.
Thank you, Leslie. Jenny?
So I'm comparing the $375 to what we're getting now. But if we didn't do anything and we got our, so in 2014-15, what would we be getting if we just got inflation? I mean, I know you have to guess because we don't know what inflation is going to be, but how does that compare to what we'd actually get if we did nothing and just got the inflation factor and maybe
Right.
got some, well, yeah.
It's a couple $100 for next year, so it's about $200 in a 2% inflation after things roll through the system.
So,
Half of this.
Yeah.
so $378 compared to just what we get for inflation doesn't.
So right now.
Are we gonna get that, would we get that any, and I'm a little confused about how all this packs on
So
top of the Amendment 23 money that I suppose is the base money that will still continue to be.
Inflation would still apply to that base under Amendment 23.
Okay.
It just wouldn't be increased by the factors, other than those new weights created for the at-risk and ELL.
So my question may not even make any sense.
Well, it's a good question, Jenny, because we ask it frequently, so we like it. However, getting the answer to the question is pretty difficult, because, you know, we get in these conversations is $384 compared to what? You know, next year, the year after, 15, 16, you know. So what we're saying is don't put too much stock in that number, because one, it changes almost daily, and two, we're not sure what it builds on. But what you can say is that you can look at the proportionate growth. So what we're pretty confident is that the ones at the top are about 3 or 4 times greater than the ones at the bottom. So if it becomes 400, then they're all going to grow proportionally. So it's not real clear in the way they're building this model. I mean, that's one of the reasons the modeling is important to us, because then we just talked today with the individual who will probably take lead on the consultant that will work on this, of anchoring it down in 12, 13 base funding. And that we know because we're spending it. We know what we got this year. We don't have to wait for the legislature to act on I mean, this we understand. So then to build off of that, because that's been what's a little bit confusing, because we see different numbers of what the PPR is and what year is it really, and is that really our amount? So what we know is what we're getting this year, and we know what every other school district's getting this year. So it's a little confusing, so it's the right question to ask, but they both would grow. Assuming you have a stable or growing economy, the present formula would grow and the new one will too. Some protections Tom has addressed are different, but they would both grow. But it's hard to know, that's the modeling piece. Do they grow together? Or do they come on top of each other in time? So that's why the modeling is so important on a base set of assumptions.
Joe?
So assuming the numbers that we've been discussing are what they're going to be, we would have a $10 million net gain, but it would cost us $7 million to build out the kindergarten schools.
So we'd get about 14 million in revenue,
Right.
we'd have probably 4 million in expenses,
For operational costs.
give or
For
take.
operational costs, but then an
Operational.
additional $7 million in capital costs. So really, we're ahead only $3 million.
Correct.
The
And
first
then
year.
First year, so to speak.
I'm gonna go ahead and jump in here. So I think what's been hard for me to kind of judge, and I'm a big supporter of education. This community has only turned down one mill levy override in its history, and I think that was because there were 2 on, and they picked one to pass and one didn't. You know, to see these numbers and to go to our community and say, would like you to vote for $1 billion worth of new revenue so that your district that you have voted for every tax increase presented to you will go from 35th worst to 6th worst. It's a hard sell. I mean, this community is nuts about their education. Their support of this district and them telling us when we're doing something that they don't like. I mean, this is what the community is based on, is their education system. They love it. And it could be a very difficult position to put them in if we ask them, in effect, pass this $1 billion because it's better for the state, but then don't you worry, we'll give you another chance to bring us back to where you had us before. So I really worry about putting this community in that position when this community has been in a position of leadership in education and advocating for education for as long as I've known this district. So I appreciate that this is a lot of work. I don't think the current act is perfect. I'm sure this next one wouldn't be. I don't think we need to aim for perfect. I think we need to aim for better. There's parts of this that I can say, this is definitely better. There are parts of this that say, yeah, I'm glad we have a legislature to go chew on it some more. I think I would stand ready, as any of the board members here, to assist in any of our local legislatures with any questions about how it might impact their schools. Also looking at, this is a community that looks for leadership in the state. And we will probably do that first, but it's going to be hard to pass a mill levy after passing $1 billion and going down. I did want to put a shout out. Thank you for putting the additional mill levy opportunities in there. One thing this community I hear about all the time is, well, what if we just gave you more money for the schools? How do we do that? It's like, well, we actually can't do that. There's no mill levy we can put in front of you so that you can give more money to your schools. So having additional opportunities, thank you for putting that in there, whoever did. And with that, we'll go back around if anyone more concerns. We do have a work session time next week where we can continue to chew on these and or maybe try and get to some consensus on what some of the aspects of the bill we think are opportunities and not. So with that, Tom?
Just one more quick comment. I think that the guaranteed portion is problematic, because it could be a situation where everyone is taxed more, but we get none of that. Go to zero. There's no guarantees. And since that has been the issue for the last 10 years, there's a lack of public trust in that money that we give, that we think is going to our education is really not going to our education. Or the things we vote for really doesn't have the effect that we're told they would have. So there's a huge amount, I think, of skepticism and mistrust amongst the voters that, I don't know, I don't trust this. I just don't trust this will happen. And that alone may just kill it altogether. So that would be my one addition.
Thanks. Lori?
Yeah, I have a fairly small detailed question. How much will it cost us to do the 4 attendance days? Like, I know you said that in the bill that there was $5 million that the state was going to use to roll this out, but what does it mean to a local school?
So there's probably 2 questions embedded there. One is, what is the cost to actually operationalize it? And then what is the cost of revenue for the district? So let me do the last one first. So if what Bill shared was that the estimate savings for the state is 2.5%.
2.1.
2.1. Sorry, rounding up. I do it all the time. 2.1. So the question is, would that be for us as well? Are we like all other districts? I would tend to think we wouldn't lose quite that much because we tend to work really hard to retain students. And if they're gone, we go after them and get them back into school or get them in a setting. I'd like to take a little pride that maybe we work a little harder than that. And maybe we go after students even though they won't generate some new revenue. So, but there would be some loss for sure because we have slippage like any district. So a couple percent or a little less. Then the cost of administering it might be your other part of your question. It really depends on, we had hours of conversation on this about really getting a state system that just pulls the data, that we don't push the data, that they pull the data, which has huge implications, and we're not sure $5 million will pull that off because it's really changing the state system and having every student management system talk to it. That's just not a small deal. That's a big deal. Some school districts in the state don't even have electronic student management systems. And so, that would just, so there's some big issues around that. I'm sure Robert Hammond just, shakes his head when he sees this coming his way. But it's probably a good thing. I don't know if the average day of the membership's a good thing. I think we could debate that. That notion that the state could draw more data and not require staff, because that could also potentially eliminate some audit responsibilities if there's more direct draw on that data. So that could be an advantage in time, but I would say there'll be some cost. Certainly getting there will be some cost.
If I could, one of the things that's in this is eliminating the schedules for high school students. So every high school student is funded at full time. So that is one of the big pieces of the audit that goes on. to spend the time to make sure that every high school student has the full and all that. And it makes it harder to do sort of extra activities for those high school students, so that's one piece. It's relatively small. The last time it was listed, it was like $12 million for the state, for the whole state to do that. But that's one of the things where eliminating that piece of the audit will help. I guess some of the concerns around the ADM are things like those folks that don't quite get here until after Labor Day, and we started 2 weeks before that, and we lost 2 weeks worth of funding on that student just because they don't show up. Now, maybe there'll be some rule-making around that there's an official day that is the start or something, but that is silent in the bill, so that kind of thing.
Because they probably expect there to be a seat in that first grade class when they show up after Labor Day, so we probably have to plan for it. So, I mean, these are big issues, I mean, that really matter to everyone.
And I do have, if anybody wants a copy, I did print up a few, so raise your hand if you would like.
And they're online, they're online.
Yes, they are online, but if you, I'll bring a few out and then you can get them afterwards.
Sam?
I think it's in the interest of every taxpayer in this district to improve funding for all kids in Colorado, not just the kids in the Boulder Valley. I agree that this bill needs to be better for the Boulder Valley, but I'm also having this tension of, if not this, what, and when. So I feel, a little soul-searching there on wanting to support this because of its potential to actually, get some extra money for public education and to improve the experience for kids in poverty throughout our state. We don't just care about the kids in our district, but we're elected to represent the needs of this particular district. So just expressing that tension that I feel, and I think we need to recognize, if we're going to go and promote this to our voters, that it's not just about our district, it's about all kids in Colorado. So.
Thank you, Sam. Jenny?
So, I agree, I mean, but there are things in this bill that I really like, just for lobbying purposes. I mean, I really like full-day kindergarten and preschool, and I like funding, I like the business about funding, high school students full-time, that's great. I do have some, I really wish we could work on some of the density issues, because I think even though we don't have a high density of poverty, we have more poor students more at-risk students in our district than some of these high-density school districts. I'm pretty sure we have more at-risk students than Center does, or than Sheridan possibly does. And when I've gone to, and it grieves me a little, I would like, so I'm a little concerned because I know that there are programs that we can't offer our at-risk students that say Sheridan can. I had a very interesting conversation with a Sheridan school board member about the wonderful program they had for getting kids into college. And we do a little bit of that, but not to the extent that they can. So I think that it's really important to remember that, so I'm a little concerned about that. And if anything we could do to get some density money for schools that we haven't been able to de-stratify. Although this is really complicated, because then you're right, Jim, we worked really hard to de-stratify our schools to eliminate that risk factor where we could, and I wouldn't want to be encouraging people to re-stratify just to get density money. So I'm wandering off. I'm sorry, I'm just tired, and this is all very confusing. There are things I like and there are things I don't like. I would like to see the discrepancy between the big winners and the big losers narrowed a little bit. And so one of the things I will say is that the not being eligible for the $100 million opportunity fund because we don't have enough at-risk kids after you're already piling on factors for at-risk and ELL and density seems like piling on a little bit. And that doesn't seem, that could be, we usually get 3.5% of anything that the state offers. If we get it just on a percentage basis, that would be $3 million we could spend, which is what we're saving on our buses that I'm thrilled about, I'm prepared to create.
Not yet, we haven't.
So, but all I could think when you said $3 million on buses was, that seems like a fortune given what we've gone through in the last few years. So that does seem a little bit like piling on to me, and I wish that would change, Raleigh. Thank you for coming, by the way. And then, I would just also like to put in a plug for educating the middle class, because the middle class are the big supporter of our school system. And if our taxpayers, many of whom could send their kids elsewhere, but they love our public schools, decided that public schools were only for poor and at-risk children and abandoned our schools in a big way, the whole system would collapse. And we can't lose that support. So while I'm willing to see a discrepancy between what Boulder gets and what school districts with more poverty and more at-risk get, I get that. It just, we just can't hollow out our system this way by refusing to deal with the adequacy issues and piling fixes on top of a, because we're just piling fixes on top of a broken system, and if you don't build the foundation, all this structure you put on top of it will collapse. It's like putting frosting on a cake that doesn't exist, you know, I mean, it'll just collapse. And so, while I also share Sam's concerns about directing more resources toward poverty, I think there has to be some balance, and I'm really concerned that, I'm really concerned that we won't be able to sell this to our voters if that discrepancy is that large. And it's not even whether I support it or not, I just don't think our voters will, so I'm really worried about that.
If I could, Jim, just on a couple of points Jenny made. I mean, there hasn't been a meeting I've attended on this discussion that I haven't questioned the $100 million for innovation. I mean, not one, including the one last Thursday with Senator Johnson, Senator Heath. I just think if we're serious about addressing all the issues you've raised here tonight, that's a place to go. And of course, what we're told is that people who support this and will financially support the campaign to follow, that's real important to them, including the governor. And so I get the politics behind that as well. So there's a rich tension there. But, you know, to get a good campaign but not get the votes won't matter either, because then everybody will get zero. So we're still very committed to try to find a way to find that balance, because or not take all of the cost of living money out. That would put some money back in all districts. I mean, that isn't just about us, that's every district. Put more money in special ed, put the $100 million all in special ed, get closer to that $475 million unreimbursable cost, helps every district. Proportionally more for us than the other factors do, yes, but it brings that floor up closer to maybe $600 over time. So I just want you to know, and you know this, but we've advocated hard to find a better balance with these numbers. And they've said, just tell us how, and we have told them how, and it's still not reflected in this bill. So that's a little frustration that several districts have right now.
Can I say something about the special ed too? Because I was in a conversation last week. I've been sort of trying to attend conversations as well, and I know you have too, Lori. And a woman who is an advocate is with the CEO of the Autism Society, has met with a number of special ed advocates around the state, and it's really important to special ed, to those groups, to get that piece reimbursed, because they feel like even though our districts are putting money from their general funds into special ed, it will increase the quality of special ed kids get if the state funds it in a better way, and it will help them move toward goals they have for their students, which have to do with inclusion. I mean, it's easier to move towards inclusion if special ed is getting reimbursed properly. So it's not just a question of all this money is fungible and don't put it into special ed because we're paying for it anyway. I think it would actually be a benefit to special ed students to do that, and that's another, and that, for that particular group in our district, is the group that I think we have the most work to do with. I would love to see that funded, because I think we have a lot of work to do with our special ed students, and I'd like to see us do it.
I think very well said, board members. Modeling the community, if you ask for input, the community gives it, just like the board members. I hope that gives the board members a sense of what this bill is taking shape as, gives us some numbers to look at, some facts to look at, printed copies of the bill if you would like. We do have a work session scheduled next week to continue on discussion about this, because this is what the district put together in a couple of days for us to understand it. We may understand things in more detail in another week, and so I'd look forward to that opportunity. Bill, thank you. Leslie, we'll thank her as well. I'm sure she's
probably watching.
Sure she is. We wish her well. And thank you, Dr. Messenger. This brings us to our next item on our agenda, the consent grouping. which tonight consists of personnel items, approval of minutes, approval of benefit plans 2013-14, cancel March 26, 2013 board meeting, reduction in force timeline, resolution to 1304 to join interlocal purchasing system, update post-secondary concurrent enrollment Board of Education policy and regulation, IGCD, IGCDR, IGCDE1, IGCDE2. Grant Curriculum and Instruction Mountain Schools STEM in Action, Colorado Department of Education, and Grant Special Education School to Work Alliance Program. I need a motion for the consent grouping. Leslie, seconded by Jenny. Does anybody have any items they would like to pull from the consent? Does any have any comments or questions about items on consent? Leslie?
Well, I just wanted to mention about the curriculum and instruction for the Mountain STEM, Schools STEM in Action, and I was excited to see that. You know, I think it's great that there's quite a few different companies, as well as the Mountain Research Station, that wants to partner with the schools. I didn't realize that the science scores may be lower at these schools, but certainly, you know, there's a lot of great outdoor activities there that kids could be involved with and get excited about STEM in their own backyard. So I'm happy that we're going for this grant.
Thank you, Leslie. Any other comments or questions? Lori?
I had a question about the joint, God, I'm not even sure how to say this, joint interlocal purchasing system. And it looks to me like we are giving authority to the purchasing director, if I got her title right, to direct and sign delivery any and all necessary requests and documents in connection therewith, as I'm reading through the document. Is there a limit to the amount of money that she can sign for with this agreement? And I know in the past we've had authorized the superintendent and budget office, and budget office, but it's always been a dollar amount, and I'm just curious.
So none of that changes.
Okay.
All of that. This is simply authoring us to participate in the purchasing co-op.
Okay,
So it's a permissive thing, but all of the rules regarding limitations or authority
Okay.
remain intact, so.
great, thanks.
Is that correct? Yeah, okay. All right, thanks.
And can I have another question? Can I ask one more?
On a different item, sure.
On a different item, yeah. I would just like to talk briefly about the benefit plans, only to comment that this information is extensive and thorough, and it looks as though it's incredibly helpful for our employees, the way the plan has been designed. And I would just like to thank the HR department for this, as well as Bob Jamieson, who I know has worked on this a great deal with doctors and medical professionals in our community. And I'm really impressed, and I think it's excellent work. So thank you to Bob, thank you to Bruce,
Yep,
thank
thank
you
you, Lori.
to the whole HR department
deserves all that.
for the work here, and all those committees of members, but it's very impressive.
Showcase stuff, yep, thanks.
All right, thanks. Anyone else? If not, Sandy, will you call the vote?
Albright?
Yes?
Belleville? Yes. Benford?
Yes.
Fuqua?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Reed?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Our last item on the agenda is agenda setting. So, a couple of notes from the last agenda setting meeting. We have a work session. Our mid-April work session was going to be budget and our meeting with Bob and Diane to continue the consensus vision, mission, and goals. We've moved the budget work session to 5 o'clock on April 9th. That's typically where the district has a preliminary book and some numbers for us. And we're going to give ourselves an hour then, because the next meeting after that, in a board meeting, we have the first information item, I believe, on the budget. So the work session next Tuesday would be 5 o'clock. I think it's
So,
that, yeah.
we've scheduled Bob and Diane to be here on the third Tuesday of April, which is the 16th. And so we haven't polled you yet, but we were sort of thinking maybe a late afternoon into evening session with them. You will have received the feedback well in advance of that. We will work back with you to see what your schedules allow, but not try to do two topics that night. Just focus on that, and that's the reason, as Jim suggested, we'd move the budget work session to the week prior. We'll have that data by then, and then we'll get started, so.
All right, and then outside of those items, any board members with additional requests? Lori?
I have a request that's not a topical request, but it's a way to deal with the scheduling questions. I would like to know if it would be possible on our agendas that are available to the public to include not only our scheduled work meetings, but also the work sessions. I mean, not our scheduled business meetings, but also the work sessions. Because I don't think they're all on there. And I just, I got goofed up on a schedule one time, so I don't know.
Are you talking about the planning document or the actual what is posted?
What's posted?
Yeah, all the work sessions are posted.
So work sessions and special meetings would be there.
Okay, so you have to go over into the special meeting section to look at it.
Click on the tab. When you open it up under agenda, it's not a regular meeting, you click special meeting.
Right. Can we get that changed so that it's more available? I mean, not everybody in the public knows, including me in the public.
Well.
I mean, thank you for telling me.
Let us look at it. We'll add
But
it to
let's
our
take
list
a-
of
can we take a look
technology
at it?
wishes that we probably won't fund in the next budget. All right,
See what we can do.
any other items? If not, we can stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
So is that off the website? Is that what Lori's referring